bar Ahaba and asked him, but he did not know, so I asked Huna, who said, that Rab decided that first it should be put in cold water and then it may be put in warm water. Aha bar Joseph leaned on the shoulders of his nephew, Hanaman bar Itzhak, and went out into the street, and told him, when they came to the house of Saphra, to lead him in. When they got there, they went in, and Aha asked of Saphra, may a shirt that had been laundered too stiffly be rubbed and softened by hand on the Sabbath? Shall we assume, that it is only intended to soften the shirt and is therefore permissible, or that it is intended also to bleach it and is hence prohibited? Saphra answered, that it might be done, and asked him, why dost thou ask about a shirt, why not ask also about a turban? I have already asked concerning a turban of Huna, and he said, that it is not permitted. Why, then, didst thou come to ask about a shirt? Thou couldst have inferred, from the turban, that the other was also not permitted. Answered Aha, a turban is bleached by unfolding and rubbing, but a shirt is not. Hista said, if a shirt had been hung up to dry by means of a stick drawn through the armholes, it should be taken down from the stick, but the stick should not be taken down alone, because the stick is not a vessel and hence must not be handled. Said Rabbah, if the stick was one that may be used by a weaver, it may be taken down, because it is regarded as a vessel. Hista said again, a bundle of herbs, if suitable for cattle food, may be handled on the Sabbath. If not, it must not be handled. Said Bar Ashi in the name of Rab, dried salt meat may be handled on Sabbath, because it can be eaten uncooked, but dried salt fish must not, because it cannot be eaten uncooked. Hista said again, a man who attends school, and has not sufficient bread, should not eat herbs, because it creates hunger. I myself have never eaten herbs, neither when I was poor nor when I was rich. When I was poor I did not want to stimulate my appetite, and when I was rich I rather ate meat and fish in place of herbs. Again he said, a young pupil who lacks food should not eat a little at a time. He should wait until he can accumulate sufficient for a hearty meal, and then eat. When I was poor I never ate until I could put my hand in the basket and find sufficient to satisfy my hunger. The same Hista said to his daughters, be chaste in the eyes of your husbands. Do not go about eating in the presence of your husbands. Do not eat herbs at night, for fear of bad breath. Do not eat dates at night. Do not drink beer at night, and use not the same toilet that men do. When someone knocks at your door, do not ask, who is it, in the masculine, but in the feminine. One must not sift feed straw through a winnow. This Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of the Tana of the following Bereitha. Eliezer ben Jacob said, a winnow must not be touched at all. Mishnah, one may clean out, the crib, for the stalled ox and throw, the superfluous fodder, over the side, so that it does not become unclean, so says Dosa. The sages declare this to be prohibited. One may remove the fodder in front of one animal and place it before another, on the Sabbath. Gemara, the schoolmen propounded a question, do the sages dissent from the first part of Dosa's decree, from the last part, or from both? Come and hear, we have learned in a Bereitha, the sages said, neither one nor the other may be thrown over the side. Said Hista, the sages differ with Dosa only when the crib was a separate vessel, but if it was part of the stall and fixed to the ground, all agree that it is prohibited to clean it out. One may remove the fodder from in front of one animal, etc. In one Bereitha we learned, that one may remove the fodder from cattle with healthy snouts and place it before cattle with diseased snouts, and in another Bereitha we learned the contrary, that fodder may be removed from cattle with diseased snouts and placed before cattle with healthy snouts. Said Abai, according to both Bereithas, the fodder of an ass may be placed before an ox, but the fodder of an ox must not be placed before an ass. The first Bereitha refers to fodder placed before an ass who does not emit phlegm from the mouth, and which may be placed before a cow who does emit phlegm, and the other Bereitha, which permits the placing of fodder of animals with bad snouts, also refers to an ass, and calls the snout of an ass bad, diseased, because he feeds on all manner of things, like thistles, etc. The cow is referred to as having a healthy snout because she is very particular as to what she feeds on, hence the two baraithas do not differ. Mishnah: straw on a bed must not be shaken up with the hand, but it may be moved with the body. If it be designed for fodder, or a pillow or cloth lie over it, it may be shaken up by hand. A clothes press which is kept in the house may be opened, but must not be used for pressing. The clothes presses of the professional washers must not be touched. Yehuda says, if the press was partly opened before the Sabbath, it may be entirely opened and drawn out. Others say, the clothes may be drawn out. Gemara: Yehuda said, it is permitted to triturate pepper seed with the handle of a knife one by one, but not two together, on Sabbath. But Rabbah said, that as a man usually triturates pepper in a mortar on a weekday, he may on Sabbath triturate as many together as he chooses with the handle of a knife. Yehuda said again, on the Sabbath, a man who bathes should first dry himself standing in the water and then go out, otherwise he carries water into unclaimed ground for 4 ells. If that is so, what about the man going into the water? By entering he pushes the water forward 4 ells, into the lake or river, by mere motion. Motion has not been provided for in the prohibitions of unclaimed ground. Said Abai, according to another version Yehuda, if a man stepped into loam, he should wipe his feet on the ground and not on a wall. But Rabbah said, why should he not do that, because it might be presumed that he plasters the wall and is engaged in building. Nay, this is not ordinary building, but more like field work. On the contrary, if he wipe his feet on the ground he may perchance smoothen out an incavation, hence he should rather wipe his feet on the wall. For the same reason, he should not wipe his feet on the side of an incavation, lest he smoothen it out. Rabbah said again, one should not cork a bottle with a piece of cotton or cloth, lest he wring it. Kahana said, the dirt on a garment should be removed by rubbing the cloth on the inside and not on the outside, lest it seem like washing. Abulha in the name of Elazar, quoting Yanai, said, one may scrape off dirt on an old shoe, but not a new one. With what should it be scraped off? With the back of a knife, said Abulha. Said a certain old man to him, withdraw thy teaching before that of Haya, one must not scrape off dirt on an old nor on a new shoe. One must also not rub his foot with oil, while it is still in the shoe. He may, however, rub his foot with oil and then put on his shoe or his sandal. He may also anoint his whole body with oil and lie down on a skin, although the skin is benefited by the oil. Said Hista, providing the oil dripping from the body onto the skin is only sufficient to polish the skin, but if there is enough to soften the skin one must not lie down on it. The rabbis taught, a small man should not wear a large shoe, lest it fall off and he be forced to carry it on the Sabbath. He may, however, wear a large shirt, as there is no fear of his taking that off and carrying it. A woman should not go out with a torn shoe on the Sabbath, lest she be laughed at and carry the shoe. She also must not accept chalitza in such a shoe, but if she did so, the chalitza is valid. She also should not wear a new shoe, that she had not tried on before the Sabbath, lest it be too large and she take it off and carry it. Such is the explanation of Bar Kapra. In one Baraitha we have learned, that one may remove the shoe of a statue, while in another we were taught that it must not be removed. This presents no difficulty. The one Baraitha is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, who differ with Eliezer, while the other is in accordance with the opinion of Eliezer, as we have learned in another Baraitha. Yehuda said in the name of Eliezer, that if the shoe was loose and easily removed it might be taken off. 21. Regulations concerning the pouring out of wine from vessels covered with a stone, which must not be lifted, and the clearing off of crumbs, etc. From the table Mishnah, one may lift up a petted child that has a stone in its hand, also a basket in which there is a stone. One may also handle unclean theruma, heave offerings, together with clean and with ordinary grain. Yehuda saith, one may also take out theruma from mixed grain in proportion of 1 to the 100. Gemara, Rabbah said, if a man carried out a child to whose neck a purse of money was fastened, he is culpable of carrying the purse, but if he carried out the corpse of a child which had a purse of money fastened to it, he is free. Why is the man culpable in the first instance, for the carrying of the purse and not for carrying the child. He holds with our Nathan, who said, that a living thing carries itself. Why not say, that the purse is an accessory to the child? Have we not learned in a Mishnah, page 182, that if a man carried out a person on a litter he is not culpable of carrying even the litter, because it is of no consequence to the person? A litter is regarded as of no consequence to the person, but a purse is not held to be part of a child. Why, in the second instance, is the man not culpable for carrying the corpse of the child? Rabbah holds, with our Simeon, that every labor which is not performed for its own sake does not make a person culpable, and he is not culpable for carrying the purse, because in his sorrow he does not think of the purse that the child was wont to play with. An objection was made, to Rabbah's teaching by virtue of the above Mishnah one may lift up a child with a stone in its hand. The disciples of our Yanai explained this as follows: a child is referred to that yearns for its father, and if it were not carried it would become sick. The stone is no hindrance to its being carried. If that is the case, why is a stone mentioned? Why not money? Did not Rabbah say, that the child may be carried if it have a stone in its hand, but not money? That is simple. If the stone fall to the ground the father will not pick it up, but if money falls he will pick it up. We have been taught by a Baraitha in support of Rabbah, if one carry his clothes, folded, on his back, or his sandals or his rings in his hand, he is culpable; if he wear them, however, he is free. If he carry out a man dressed in clothes, sandals, and rings, he is also free, but if he carried the clothes, sandals, or rings alone, he would be culpable. A basket in which there is a stone, etc. Why should a man not be culpable for carrying it? Is not the basket a basis for a prohibited thing? Said our Hayabar Ashi in the name of Rabbah, here a basket is spoken of which is broken, and where the stone fills in the gap, making the basket whole. One may also handle unclean heave offerings. Said our Hista, when may unclean heave offerings be handled? If the clean heave offering be at the bottom and the unclean on top, the unclean may be removed, but if the clean be on top, it may be removed, and the unclean must remain untouched. If the unclean be on top, let it be thrown off until the clean is reached. Answered our Eli, Rab said, here fruit is spoken of, that would be spoiled by being thrown off. An objection was made, we have learned in a Baraitha, unclean heave offerings may be handled with clean and with ordinary grain, it makes no difference where it lies, on the top or at the bottom. This is a refutation of our Hista. Our Hista might say, that our Mishnah treats of a heave offering that is needed for food, while the Baraitha treats of a heave offering when the space it occupies is needed. What impels our Hista to explain the Mishnah in that manner? Said Rabbah, from the latter part of the Mishnah it seems to be in the sense explained by him, for that part of the Mishnah says, that if money lie on a bolster, the bolster may be turned so that the money shall fall down, and Rabbah bar Hannah in the name of our Mishnah, if a stone lie at the opening of a barrel, the barrel may be bent over, so that the stone fall down. If the barrel stand amongst other barrels, it may be lifted and then bent over, in order that the stone fall down. If money lie on a bolster, the bolster may be turned, so that the money fall down. If dirt be found on the bolster, it may be cleaned off with a rag, and if the bolster be of leather, water may be poured on it until the dirt is removed. Gemara, said our Huna in the name of Rab, the Mishnah refers to a case where the stone lying at the opening of the barrel was left there by accident. If it was placed there purposely, the barrel becomes a basis to a prohibited thing and must not be handled. If the barrel stand amongst other barrels, etc. Who is the Tana who holds, that where there are both a permissible and a prohibited thing we must engage ourselves only with the permissible thing and not with the prohibited? Said Rabbah bar Hannah in the name of our Johanan, that is our Simeon ben Gamaliel, who said in Tract Betza, that if the waste was in a larger quantity than the eatable portion might be taken, but the waste must not be touched. In the case of the barrel, the useful portion is certainly in a larger quantity than the useless, why, then, should he not remove the stone? If a man should wish to remove the wine, it would necessitate his lifting the barrel at all events, with the barrel the stone would also be lifted, and in that case the useless would surpass in quantity the useful. We have learned in a Beratha, our Jose said, if a barrel stood in a cellar amongst other barrels, or among glassware, and there is danger that if the barrel is lifted and bent over the stone covering it will fall upon another barrel, or upon some of the glassware and break it, it may be lifted, carried to another place, bent over so that the stone roll off, its contents removed to the quantity required, and returned to its former place. If money lie on a bolster, etc. Said our Chaya bar Ashi in the name of Rab, the Mishnah here refers to a case where the money was accidentally left on the bolster, but if it is laid there on purpose, the bolster becomes a basis to a prohibited thing and must not be handled. Chaya the son of Rab of Difti taught the same as Rabba bar Hannah in the name of our Johanan, viz. Page 323, that if the space occupied by the bolster is required, the bolster together with the money may be moved. Our O'Shea said, if a purse of money was accidentally left in private ground, one may put a loaf of bread or a child on it and take it back to the house. Our Itzhak said, this rule applies not only to a purse of money, but also to a brick that is needed for any purpose. Said our Jehuda bar Sheila in the name of our Asi, that a box of money was once forgotten in the market and our Johanan was asked what was to be done. He ordered them to place a loaf of bread or a child on it, and take it in. Said Mar Zutra, all these rules are laid down in the case of where the things referred to were left by accident. But our Ashi said, that such is not the case, and that a child or a loaf of bread can be used to move a corpse only. When Abayi had to bring in stalks of grain, he would put on them some article of food, or some vessel, and bring it into the house, and when Rabbah had to bring in an uncooked dove, he would put a knife on it and bring it into the house. When our Joseph heard of this, he said, how sagacious are the minds of these young scholars. When did the rabbis permit this to be done? When the things to be brought were forgotten on the outside, but they did not permit their being moved to commence with. Abayi answered, I have done right. For were I not a trustworthy man, I would not have used those means to bring in the grain at all. Stalks of grain are a useful thing to sit on, and may be handled. And Rabbah said, I have also done right. For were I not a trustworthy man, I would not have placed a knife on the dove at all, as there are some people who eat it raw, hence it may be handled on the Sabbath. Shall we say, that Rabbah holds that the raw dove may be handled only because it is eaten, raw, by some people, and were it not so it could not be handled, on Sabbath, hence beholds as our Jehuda in Tract Betza. Did not Rabbah say to his servant on a festival, fry a duck for me and throw the entrails to the cat, and we see thence that he permitted his servant to handle the entrails because they were food for a cat. The entrails would have spoiled if left over for the next day, and we must assume therefore that they were designed as food for the cat from the day preceding. Mishnah, the school of Shammai teaches, bones and husks may be removed from the table. The school of Hillel, however, teaches, one may only lift the whole table board, or cloth, and shake off what is left over. All crumbs smaller than an olive may be removed from the table, also the hulls of beans and lentils, because they may serve for fodder. It is allowed to use a sponge for wiping, providing it has a handle made of leather, otherwise, it is not allowed. At all events, one may handle a sponge on the Sabbath, and it is not subject to defilement. Gemara, said our Naaman, we know that the school of Shammai holds to the opinion of our Jehuda, who accepts the theory of Muksa, and that the school of Hillel holds to the opinion of our Simeon, who disregards the law of Muksa. Hence the order of the Mishnah should be reversed. The dictum of the school of Shammai should be credited to the school of Hillel, and vice versa. Hulls of beans, etc. The permission to remove the hulls of beans, etc., is certainly in accordance with our Simeon, who disregards the law of Muksa, and the latter clause of the Mishnah referring to a sponge, which must not be used for wiping off the table unless it have a handle, because without the handle it would be wrung and that is prohibited, although the intention to wring it did not exist, is in accordance with the opinion of our Jehuda, who holds, that one must not perform an act even unintentionally. In this case our Simeon also agrees with our Jehuda, because it again presents a parallel case to the beheading of a creature where no intention to kill it exists. The pits of dates, Armiasa, to which some of the meat adheres may be handled, and those of Parsiasa 173 must not be handled. Samuel used to handle the latter with bread, holding to his opinion that anything at all may be done with bread, while others hold that bread should not be put to any uses except for food. Rabba would hold them with a pitcher of water. Our Shesheth would throw them out by means of his tongue, and our Papa would throw them underneath the bed. It was told of our Zacharias ben Abkulos, that he would turn his face towards the back of the bed and throw them out with his tongue. 22. Regulations concerning preparation of food and beverages. Mishnah: should a cask break open, sufficient may be saved for 3 meals. The owner may also call to others, come and save for yourselves, whatever you can. No portion of the leakage, however, may be sponged up, soaked up with a sponge. One must not press fruit in order to extract the juice, and if it ooze out by itself, it must not be used. Our Jehuda said, if the fruit is for eating, the juice which oozes out may be used, but if it is for beverage, it must not be used. If honeycombs be broken on the eve of Sabbath and the honey ooze out, the honey must not be used. Our Eliezer, however, permits this. Gemara: we have learned, that wine must not be soaked up with a sponge, and oil must not be dipped with a spoon, in the same manner as it is done on weekdays, there must be a slight change. The rabbis taught, if fruit becomes scattered in a courtyard, private ground, it may be gathered up and eaten, but this must not be done as on a weekday, i.e., gathered in a basket. One must not press fruit, etc. Said our Jehuda in the name of Samuel, our Jehuda, of the Mishnah, agrees with the sages in the case of olives and grapes. Why so? Because this class of fruit is intended only for pressing, and the juice which must of a necessity ooze out might be calculated upon by the owner for a beverage. Ula said, that our Jehuda differed with the sages even in the case of olives and grapes. Our Johanan said, that the halakha prevails according to our Jehuda as far as other fruit is concerned, but not as regards olives and grapes. Said our Aba in the name of our Jehuda, quoting Samuel, our Jehuda subsequently agreed with the sages as regards olives and grapes, and the sages also agreed with him later concerning other fruit. Said our Jeremiah to our Aba, wherein do they differ? And our Aba answered, go and seek, and thou wilt find it. Said our Naaman bar Itzhak, it seems to me that they differ concerning berries and pomegranates, for we have learned in a Beretha, the juice of olives or grapes, which after having been pressed and brought into the house had oozed out by itself, must not be used, whether the fruit had been brought in for eating or beverage. If a man squeezed out the juice of berries and pomegranates and brought the pressed fruit into the house to eat, if any more juice oozed out, he might drink it, but if he brought the fruit expressly for eating purposes or for beverage, or without any express design, he must not drink the juice that had oozed out, so said our Jehuda. The sages, however, prohibit the use of the juice under any circumstances. Said our Jehuda in the name of Samuel, a man may squeeze out a bunch of grapes directly into a pot, but not into a bowl. Why not? Because if he squeezed it into the pot it is proof positive that it will be used for food, but if squeezed into the bowl it might be used as a beverage. Said our Hista, from the decree of our master we can learn, that a man may milk a goat right into the pot, but not into a bowl. Thus we see that Samuel holds, that beverages when mixed with eatables are also regarded as eatables. Said our Zerah in the name of our Haya bar Ashi, quoting Rab, a bunch of grapes must be squeezed directly into the pot, but not into a bowl, but the oil of fish may be pressed out even into a bowl. Our Demi repeated this decree. Said Abai to him, ye teach this in the name of Rab, hence ye have no objection, but we learn this in the name of Samuel, hence we have the following objection. Can Samuel say that the oil of a fish may be squeezed out even in a bowl? Were we not taught, that if a man squeezed out herbs which were soaked in wine and vinegar, it is, according to Rab, permitted to commence with, if the herbs were to be eaten, but if the juice only was to be used, the man would not be liable for a sin offering, but he should not do it to start with. If the herbs, however, were cooked, whether the man wished to eat them or only use the juice, he might squeeze them out into a bowl. Samuel, however, decreed, that be the herbs cooked or raw, one may do this only if he intends to eat the herbs, but not if he only intends to use the juice. If he does, however, he is not liable for a sin offering. Our Demi answered, by the Lord. My eyes have seen it, and not as a stranger, that I heard this decree from our Jeremiah, he from our Ezra, he again from our bar Ashi, and the latter from Rabbah's mouth. In regard to the quoted Beretha concerning the herbs that one had squeezed out, we have heard the opinion of Rab and Samuel, our Johanan said, be they cooked or raw herbs, he may do so to commence with, if he intends to eat the herbs, but if he only desires the juice he must not do so, and if he does he is liable for a sin offering. All this however, is opposed by the following Beretha: one may squeeze out herbs which were soaked in wine and vinegar on the Sabbath for use on the same day, but not for later use, but one must not press olives or grapes, and if he does, he is liable for a sin offering. Now, this is in opposition to all three, Rab, Samuel, and our Johanan. Rab could explain this in accordance with his teaching, viz. The herbs may be pressed on the Sabbath, for use on that day and not later, providing he uses the herbs for eating, but if he wishes to use the juice he must not do so, but if he does he is not liable for a sin offering, and cooked herbs he may squeeze out, whether he requires the herbs or the juice, olives and grapes he should not press, if he does, he is liable for a sin offering. Samuel could explain it according to his own opinion: a man may squeeze out herbs on Sabbath for that same day, but not for later use, and the same law applies to cooked herbs, provided they are used for eating, but if the juice is wanted they must not be pressed, etc. Our Johanan could explain the Beretha in accordance with his teaching, as follows: be the herbs cooked or soaked, they may be squeezed out if intended for eating, but if the juice is required he must not, and if he did so it is equal to pressing olives or grapes, and he is liable for a sin offering. Said our bar Ashi in the name of Rab, according to biblical law one cannot be culpable except for pressing olives and grapes. So have taught the disciples of Manasseh. Also according to biblical law, a witness that testifies from hearsay must not be accredited, with the exception of a case where he testifies to having heard that a woman's husband had died. If honeycombs be broken on the eve of Sabbath. When our Hosea came from Nehardai he brought a new Beretha, viz. If olives and grapes were crushed before the Sabbath, and the juice oozed out, it must not be drunk, but our Eliezer and our Simeon both permit it. Said our Joseph, he just tells us of another man in addition to our Eliezer. Said Abai to him, he taught us a great deal, for from our Mishnah I would say, that honeycombs were eatables before being crushed and also afterwards, therefore our Eliezer permits the use of the honey, but in the case of olives and grapes which were previously eatables and subsequently became beverages, it might be presumed that even our Eliezer would not permit their use. Hence we were instructed by our Hosea to the contrary. Mishnah, whatever has been dressed with hot water on the eve of Sabbath, may be soaked in hot water on the Sabbath, and whatever has not been dressed with hot water on the eve of Sabbath, must only be passed through hot water on the Sabbath, excepting only stale salt fish and Spanish calais, a kind of fish which was generally cured to make it eatable, for passing these through hot water is all the dressing required for them. Gemara, what does the Mishnah refer to? For instance, the hen of our Aba. He would cook a hen, then soak it in water, and when it would fall to pieces he would eat it. Said our Safra, I was there at one time and our Aba served me with some of that dish, and had he not given 3-year-old wine immediately after it, I would have been forced to vomit. Our Johanan would spit every time B was reminded of Babylonian kutak, a dish made of small salt fish boiled in milk. Said our Joseph, yeah, and let us spit when we think of our Aba's hen. And our Gaza said, I was in Palestine at one time, and made that same dish, kutak, so they begged me to give them some for all the sick in Palestine. And whatever has not been dressed with hot water, etc. What is the law concerning one who had passed calais or stale salt fish through hot water? Said our Joseph, he is liable for a sin offering. Said Mar the son of Rabina, we have understood it so from the Mishnah, because the last clause is, for passing these through hot water is all the dressing required for them, and the finishing of a certain kind of labor is equivalent to hammering. Our bar Aba and our Basi once sat in the presence of our Johanan, and our Johanan dozed off. So our bar Aba asked our Basi why the fowls of Babylon were so fat. Our Basi answered, go to the desert of Azza in Palestine, and I will show thee fatter ones. Why are the Babylonians so merry during the festivals? Asked ʻtɑːlmʊd again. Because they are poor, and during the entire year they have no pleasures, so they take advantage of the festivals, was the answer. Why are the scholars of Babylon so well dressed? Queried ʻtɑːlmʊd. Because they are ignorami, and must wear good clothes in order to command respect, answered rabbis. At that moment Johanan awoke, and said to them, Youngsters, did I not tell you, that it is written, Proverbs 7. For, say unto wisdom, thou art my sister, which means, if a thing is as certain to thee as the fact that thou canst not marry thy own sister, then say it. Otherwise, thou shalt not say it. Then why speak such foolishness? Then said they, Let master tell some things, which would benefit us. Said Johanan, the fowls of Babylon are fat because they were never driven away from home, as it is written, Jeremiah 48. 11. Moab was ever at ease from his youth, and he was resting on his lees, and was not emptied from vessel to vessel, and had not gone into exile, therefore had his taste remained in him and his scent was not changed. Whence do we know that the fowls of Palestine were driven from home? It is written, Ibid 9. 9. Both the fowls of the heavens and the beasts are fled, they are gone away. Jacob said in the name of Johanan, that the fowls and the beasts and all else came back to Palestine with the exception of the Spanish Calais. The reason will be explained in Tract Bechorath. Why are the Babylonians merry during the festivals? Because they were not included in the curse of Hosea 2. 13. And I will cause to cease all her mirth, her festival, her new moon, and her Sabbath, and all her appointed feasts. Said Yitzhak, indeed it was so. There was not a single feast in Palestine, that the military did not come to Sepphoris, and Hanina said, there was not a single feast in Palestine, that captains, guards, and supervisors did not come to Tiberias. Why are the scholars of Babylon so well dressed? Because they are all strangers. As the saying goes, in a city where a man is known, he may wear whatever he chooses, but where he is not sufficiently known he should dress well. Joseph taught, it is written, Isaiah 27. 6. In the future shall Jacob yet take root, Israel shall bud and blossom, and shall fill the face of the world with fruit. What is meant by bud and blossom? The scholars of Babylon, who wind blossoms and wreaths around the Torah. Mishnah, a man may break open a cask, to eat dry figs therefrom, provided, he does not intend using the cask afterwards as a vessel. He must not pierce the bunghole of a cask, such is the decree of Jehudah, or Hosea, the sages permit this to be done. And one must not bore a hole in the side of it, but if it was already perforated, he must not fill it up with wax, because he would smoothen the wax thereby. Said Jehudah, such a case was brought before Johanan ben Sakai, at Arab, and he observed, I doubt whether that act does not involve liability to bring a sin offering. Gemara, said O'Shea, when may a man hold a dirk to open a cask of figs? If the figs are very tightly packed, for then he would have to use a knife or a dirk to get the figs out, but if they were packed loose he must not use a knife to open the cask. An objection was raised. We have learned, that Simeon ben Gamaliel said, a man may bring in a cask of wine, cut off the bung head with a knife, and serve it to the guests with impunity. This Baratha is in accordance with the opinion of the sages, while our Mishnah is in accordance with the decree of Nehemiah, who holds that no vessel may be used for any other purpose but that for which it was originally intended. What impelled O'Shea to make the entire Mishnah conform with the dictum of Nehemiah? Let him say, that the cask may be opened with a knife even if the figs are loose, and thus be in accord with the sages? Answered Rabbah, the reason is, that O'Shea could not quite comprehend why the Mishnah specified figs, it could have said fruit, and on that account he reasoned as stated. In one Baratha we have learned, palm leaf baskets containing dried figs and dates may be untied, taken apart, or cut, and in another Baratha we were taught, that they may be untied, but not taken apart or tied. This presents no difficulty, for one Baratha is in accordance with the opinion of the sages, and the other is in accord with Nehemiah. A question was asked of Shesheth, may a cask be bored with an auger on the Sabbath? Shall we assume that one intended to make an opening in the cask and hence it is prohibited, or that he intended merely to make a larger space for the flow of the wine and it is therefore permitted? The answer was, the intention was to make an opening, and it is prohibited. An objection based upon the teaching of our Simeon ben Gamaliel previously mentioned was raised, and the answer was, there the intention certainly was to make the space larger, while here it is obvious that the intention was to make an opening, otherwise, he would have broken open the cask with a knife. One must not pierce the bunghole of a cask. Said our Huna, they differ only in reference to the top of a bunghole of a cask, but as for the side, all agree that it is not allowed, and this is carried out by the later clause in the Mishnah, viz., and he must not bore a hole in the side of it. Our Hista, however, said, they differ only as far as boring a hole in the side of the bunghole is concerned, but as for the top, all agree that it is permitted, and the later clause of the Mishnah means to state that one must not bore a hole in the side of the cask itself. The rabbis taught, one must not bore a new hole on Sabbath, but if it was already made he may enlarge it, and others say, that he must not enlarge it, but all agree, that if the hole was merely stopped it may be reopened. The first Tana prohibits the boring of a new hole, because thereby an opening is made. Does not enlarging a hole improve the opening? Said Rabbah, according to biblical law, an opening through which one cannot enter or go out is not considered a door, but the rabbis made this a precaution on account of chicken coops, the holes of which are made for the purpose of admitting fresh air and emitting the fowl. Therefore making a hole in a coop is equivalent to making a whole coop, for without holes it is of no value. Enlarging a hole, however, is permitted, because one would enlarge a hole in a chicken coop, lest an ichneumon should enter and kill a chicken. Why do some say, then, that holes should not even be enlarged? Because it might be that one did not make the hole in a chicken coop large enough, and would enlarge it. Our Naaman taught in the name of our Johanan, that the halakha remains according to the last dictum. All agree, that a hole which had been stopped up may be reopened. Said our Jehuda in the name of Samuel, this was said only in the case of where a hole had been stopped to preserve the aroma of the wine. If, however, the hole was stopped up in order to strengthen the cask, it must not be reopened. What is meant by preserving the aroma and by strengthening the cask? Said our Hista, if the hole was on top of the cask and was stopped up, it was for the purpose of preserving the aroma, but if at the bottom, it was for the purpose of strengthening the cask. Rabbah said, if it was at the bottom, it was also only for the purpose of preserving the aroma, and only if the hole was stopped up right underneath the lees of the wine, it was for the purpose of strengthening the cask. Rab prohibits the inserting of a faucet into a cask, and Samuel permits it. All agree, that cutting a hole in the cask for the purpose of inserting a faucet is prohibited, and that replacing the faucet, if once removed, is permitted. They differ, however, only when a hole had already been made in the cask before the Sabbath, but it was not quite fit for the faucet. Those who say, that it is prohibited, do so as a precaution lest one cut a fresh hole, while those that permit this to be done say no precautionary measure is necessary. This is like the following difference between Tanaim. We have learned that a screw must not be fitted on a festival, much less on a Sabbath, but if it fall out it may be replaced on Sabbath, and so much more on a festival, and our Yashia makes the ordinance more lenient. What does our Yashia make more lenient? Shall we assume, that he refers to the first part and permits a screw to be cut? In that event, he would be improving a vessel, and that is certainly not allowed. Shall we assume, on the other hand, that he refers to the second part, the first Tana alone permits this? We must say, therefore, that the screw was already cut, but did not quite fit, and he permits the fitting of it. Hence the same difference exists here as between the previous Tanaim. Our Sheshet the son of our Gedi in the name of our Johanan said, the halakha prevails according to our Yashia. But if it was already perforated, etc. To fill it up with oil is, according to Rab, prohibited, as a precaution lest he fill it with wax, and according to Samuel it is permitted, as the latter does not deem a precautionary measure necessary. Said our Samuel bar Hannah to our Joseph, thou hast said distinctly in the name of Rab, that oil is permitted. Answered our Joseph, "Thou hast caught me in a trap." 174 Said Samuel, "The leaf of myrtle must not be put in the bunghole of a cask, so that the wine flow over it." Why so? Yamar of Difti said, "As a precaution lest a groove, channel, be made." Ashi said, "As a precaution lest the leaf be broken off, from its stem." What difference is there? The difference is in the case of a leaf that had already been broken off, from its stem. The precautionary measure of Yamar remains, while that of Ashi falls to the ground of itself. Is it permitted to wrap oneself in a bolster in public ground and bring it into private ground? Rab prohibits this and Samuel permits it. If the bolster were soft and could be folded, they do not differ, all agreeing that it is permitted. If it were hard and could not be folded, all agree that it is prohibited. They differ only concerning a bolster that was neither soft nor hard, but a medium between the two. One says, that it appears like a burden and should not be carried, while the other holds that it is not a burden and may be carried, and the opinion just ascribed to Rab was not stated by him expressly, but was merely inferred from the following incident. Rab came to a certain place and found that he lacked room, so he went out into a lane, unclaimed ground, and when a bolster was brought to him he would not sit down on it. Those who saw this inferred therefore that he did not hold it to be permissible. As a matter of fact, this was not so. Rab had it proclaimed that a bolster was allowed to be used, but in honor of the masters who were with him he would not sit down on that bolster. Who were those masters? Kahana and Asi. Mishnah: one may put cooked victuals into a cave, or cellar, for the purpose of preserving them, also put clean water, contained in a vessel, into water that is not drinkable, in order to keep it, the former, cool, likewise cold water, in a vessel, into hot water, in order to warm the former. One whose clothes have dropped into the water while on the road, may unhesitatingly go on with them. As soon as he arrives at the outmost court, of the city or village, he may spread his clothes in the sun to dry, but he must not do this publicly. Gemara: is this not self-evident? One might say, that there should be a precaution against grading, smoothing, any incavations that might be in the cave, hence we are told that such is not the case. Clean water into water that is not drinkable, etc. Is this not self-evident? Yeah, but this is taught on account of the later clause in the Mishnah, i.e., putting cold water into hot. Is this also not self-evident? One might say, that this should be prohibited, as a precaution lest one also put a vessel containing cold water into glowing cinders to warm, so we are told, that such a precaution is not necessary. One whose clothes have dropped into the water, etc. Said Jehuda in the name of Rab, all things which were forbidden on account of causing suspicion among the people, that one is committing a wrongful act, should not be done, not only publicly, but even in the innermost recesses of one's rooms. Is this not contradictory to our Mishnah, which says, that one may spread his clothes in the sun, but not publicly? This is a difference between Tanaim, for in reference to this Mishnah we have learned in a Beretha, that both Eliezer and Simeon hold, that it is prohibited even when not done publicly. Said Huna, he who dusts his clothes on a Sabbath is liable for a sin offering. This refers only, however, to a new garment, but not to an old one, and the new garment only when it is black, but garments of other colors may be dusted. Referring to a black garment, it is only then prohibited to be dusted if its possessor is particular about it, to such a degree, that he never puts it on without dusting it. Ula once came to Pumbeditha and he saw the rabbis dusting their clothes on a Sabbath, so he said, the rabbis are violating the Sabbath. So Jehuda said to his disciples, dust your clothes right before his eyes, we are not particular. Abai stood before Joseph. Joseph said to him, give me my hat. And seeing that the hat was very dusty, Abai hesitated to give it to him. So Joseph said, take hold of it and dust it, we are not particular. We have learned in a Beretha, those who deal in clothes, and carry them folded on their shoulders on Sabbath, are liable for a sin offering. This refers not only to clothes dealers, but also to others. Clothes dealers, however, are mentioned, because that is their usual custom. The same is the case with a merchant who carries out a bag of money. He is liable for a sin offering, and not only a merchant, but also others, but merchants are mentioned because it is their wont to carry money in that manner. Said Jehuda, it once happened that Hyrcanos the son of Eleazar ben Hyrcanos went out on Sabbath with a kerchief folded on his shoulder and tied to one of his fingers with a piece of twine, in order that it might not fall down, and when the sages heard this, they said that the twine was unnecessary, for he could have carried the kerchief without it. It happened that Ulla came to the house of Asi Barhim, and he was asked whether it was allowed to make a groove of the clothes on Sabbath. The Babylonians wore long garments, and by turning them up at the bottom a quasi-groove was made. Ulla answered, so said Eli, it is prohibited to make a groove on Sabbath. What is a groove? Said Zerah, a groove made of the clothes of the Babylonians. Said Papa, bear this rule in mind, if the clothes are turned up for the purpose of preventing their becoming soiled, it is prohibited, but if they are turned up to improve their appearance, it is allowed, as Shisha the son of Gedi would always arrange his cloak, toga, tastefully, on a weekday, hence it is customary and may also be done on Sabbath. When Dimi came from Palestine, he related, it once happened that Rabbi went out into the field, and both ends of his toga hung on his shoulders. Said Jehoshua the son of Zirus, the son of Meir's father-in-law before Rabbi, did not Meir say, that in a case of this kind one is liable for a sin offering? Said Rabbi, was Meir so particular, that he determined just how far down the ends of one's toga should reach? Still he, Rabbi, let down his toga, and when Rabbin came from Palestine he said, that it was not Jehoshua ben Zirus who made that remark, but Jehoshua ben Bepuzai the son-in-law of Akiba, and not that Meir said what has just been cited, but that Akiba had said that. Also, that Rabbi had inquired whether Akiba was so particular, and lastly, that Rabbi let down his toga. When Samuel ben Jehuda came from Palestine he said, that Rabbi was only asked concerning such a case, but not that he himself was the party referred to. Mishnah, one who bathes in the water of a cavern or in the hot springs of Tiberias, though he wipe himself with 10 towels, must not carry them off in his hand, but if 10 persons wipe themselves, their faces, their hands, and their feet, with 1 towel, they might carry it off in their hands. One may anoint and rub the stomach with the bands, but not so as to cause fatigue. One must not brush the body with a flesh brush or descend into a curtuma. 175 One must not take an emetic or stretch the limbs of an infant, or put back a rupture. One who has strained his hand or foot must not pour cold water on it, but he may wash it in the usual way. If he thereby becomes cured, it is well. Gemara, the Mishnah teaches, the water of a cavern, in connection with the hot springs of Tiberias, hence it must be, that the water of a cavern is also hot. And again it says, one who bathes, and not, one may bathe, from which we see, that to commence with, bathing in those waters is not allowed, but merely to rinse one's self is permitted, even to commence with. This is according to the opinion of Simeon. Though he wipe himself with 10 towels, etc. The first part of this clause in the Mishnah imparts something new and unexpected in that it teaches, that, although if one man wipe himself with 10 towels, there will be very little water contained in the towels, still he might through thoughtlessness wring them, and the latter part of the clause also imparts something new and unexpected, stating, as it does, that if 10 men wipe themselves with 1 towel, although the towel will contain a great deal of water, they will mutually remind each other that it must not be wrung. The rabbis taught, a man may wipe himself with a towel and leave it at the window of a house that is nearest to the wall of the bathhouse, but he must not give it to the bathhouse employees, because they are suspected of wringing it on the Sabbath. Simeon, however, says, a man may wipe himself with 1 towel and carry it in his hand to his house. Said Abai to Joseph, how is the law? And he answered, did not Haya bar Aba in the name of Johanan say, that the law prevails according to Simeon? Did Johanan say this indeed? Did he not say elsewhere, that the halakha prevails according to the anonymous teachers in the Mishnah, and the Mishnah teaches, that even if one man wiped himself with 10 towels he must not carry them off in his hand? Johanan teaches, that the Mishnah concludes with, so said the son of Hakanai. Hence it is the teaching of one individual. Haya bar Aba in the name of Johanan said, the bathhouse employees may carry the sheets with which the women wipe themselves in the bathhouse on the street by wrapping them around their bodies, provided they wrap them over their heads and the greater part of their body. Our Hayabar Aba said in the name of our Johanan, a large veil which is worn by women should have the two ends that hang down in the back tied. And he said again, that they should be tied underneath the shoulders. Rabbah said to the inhabitants of Mahutsa, if ye must carry clothes for the military on Sabbath, wrap them around you underneath the shoulders. One may anoint and rub his stomach. The rabbis taught, the stomach may be rubbed and anointed on the Sabbath, provided it is not done the same as on weekdays. How should it be done? Our Hama bar Hanina said, he should first anoint it and then rub it, but our Johanan said, that he might do both at the same time. But so as not to cause fatigue, etc. Said our Hayabar Aba in the name of our Johanan, it is not allowed to stand on the bed of Lake Dumseth, because the loam at the bottom is saline and immersion in the lake causes fatigue. Said our Jehuda in the name of Rab, the days on which a cure in that lake, for bodily ills, may be effected are only 21, and Pentecost occurs during those 21 days. The schoolmen asked, does Pentecost fall at the beginning of the 21 days or at the end? Come and hear, Samuel said, that all waters taken for a cure are effective only from Passover to Pentecost. As for waters taken internally, Samuel may be right, because during cool weather one takes more exercise and thus the waters are effective, but for bathing it would seem that Pentecost should be the commencement. Said our Helbo, the wine of the land of Pergatha and the waters of the lake Dumseth robbed Israel of 10 tribes, because indulgence in these pleasures are detrimental to spiritual welfare. Our Eleazar ben Arak happened to be there, and indulged in those luxuries to such an extent that he forgot his learning, and afterwards the sages had to pray for his return unto the law. This is as we have learned elsewhere, Abath our Nehurai said, go into exile only in a place of learning and think not that the law will follow thee, or that thy comrades will preserve it in thy hands, and do not depend upon thy acquired knowledge. This our Nehurai is, according to some, the same Eleazar ben Arak, and he was called Nehurai, because this signifies, in Hebrew, light of the eyes, for he enlightened the eyes of many scholars with his interpretations. One must not brush the body, etc. The rabbis taught, one must not brush the body with a flesh brush on Sabbath. Our Simeon ben Gamaliel said, if one's feet were soiled, he might brush them the same as on weekdays unhesitatingly. The mother of Samuel the son of Jehuda made her son a silver brush. Or descend into a curtuma. Why so? Because the bottom of a curtuma is slippery, and one might fall and wet his clothes, and thus be tempted to wring them. One must not take an emetic. Said Rabbah bar Hannah in the name of our Johanan, one must not take a medicament as an emetic, but may thrust his finger down his throat and thus cause vomiting. Or stretch the limbs of an infant. Said Rabbah bar Hannah in the name of our Johanan, to sway the child on Sabbath is allowed. Or put back a rupture. Said our Hannah of Baghdad in the name of Samuel, the halakha prevails, that it may be done. Samuel learns in the Mishnah, instead of, it is not allowed, it is allowed. Rabbah bar Hannah once came to Pumbeditha, but did not go into the college of our Jehuda. So our Jehuda sent for Ada, the officer of the college, and said to him, go and take a pledge of Rabbah bar Hannah. The officer went and did so. Afterwards Rabbah bar Hannah came to the college. When he came he heard our Jehuda teach, that a rupture must not be put back on the Sabbath. Said he to him, so said our Hannah of Baghdad in the name of Samuel, that the halakha prevails permitting this to be done. Answered our Jehuda, it is our Hannah and our Samuel. Yet we never heard of this before. Now thou canst see that I was right in demanding a pledge for thy appearance. Hadst thou not come, we would never have heard this. One who has strained his hand or foot, etc. Our Ivia sat in the presence of our Joseph, and he dislocated his hand. Said he to our Joseph, making a motion to replace it, may I replace it thus? Nay, said our Joseph. And thus may I? Asked our Ivia, making another motion. Nay, was the answer again. Thus questioning, he finally succeeded in replacing his hand. Said Joseph to him, "What didst thou ask me for?" It is expressly stated in our Mishnah, that if one strained his hand or his foot, he must not pour cold water on it, but he may bathe it in the usual way. If he thereby becomes cured, it is well. Did we not learn in the same Mishnah that a rupture must not be put back, and still Samuel permitted it to be done? Asked Arphivia. Answered Joseph, "Canst thou weave everything into one garment? What we have learned, we may follow, but what we have not learned, we cannot." 23. Regulations concerning borrowing, casting lots, waiting for the close of the Sabbath, and attending to a corpse. Mishnah. A man may borrow of an acquaintance jugs of wine or oil, on Sabbath, provided he does not say to him, "Lend them to me." A woman may also borrow bread from her acquaintance. If the man is refused, by his acquaintance, he may leave his upper garment, as a pledge, with the lender, and settle his account after Sabbath. Thus, also, in Jerusalem, the custom was, if the eve of Passover fell on a Sabbath, a man might leave his upper garment with the vendor, take his paschal lamb, and settle his account after the holiday. Gemara, Rabba bar Hanan said to Abaye, "What is the difference between saying, 'I want to borrow,' and 'lend me'?" Answered Abaye, "The difference is, if a man says, 'I want to borrow,' he usually returns what he has borrowed and the lender will not be compelled to write it down, but if he says, 'Lend, trust me,' the lender generally writes down what he has lent." Said Rabbah again, "During the week it makes no difference, the lender is not particular whether one says, 'I want to borrow,' or 'lend me.' He writes it down just the same dash, then why should a distinction be made on Sabbath?" And Abaye answered, "The saying of, 'I want to borrow,' on Sabbath, is a reminder to the lender that the sages said, that one must not say, 'Lend me,' and thus prevents him from writing it down." The same said again to Abaye, "Let us see. The sages said, that everything done on a festival which can be done in a different manner from that on a weekday should so be done. Now, why do we not see women, who go for water with jugs, perform that work differently from their manner on a weekday?" He answered, "Because that would be impossible. For how should they do? Shall we say, that one who carries a large jug should carry a small one? That would necessitate her going twice. Or that one who carries a small jug should carry a larger one? Then she would have a heavier burden to carry. Should she cover it with a cloth? Then she might wring it. Should she cover it with a lid? Then she might have to untie it. Hence it is impossible." 176. A woman may also borrow bread from an acquaintance, etc. From the Mishnah we see, that only on Sabbath a woman must not say, "Lend me," when borrowing bread, and on weekdays that would be permitted. Would this not be against the decree of Hillel, who prohibits this on account of possible usury, as explained in Tract Baba Metzia? Nay, we can say that the Mishnah is in accordance with Hillel's decree, but here it refers to such places where bread has a fixed value, while Hillel refers to places where bread has not a fixed value. If the man be refused, etc. It was taught, a loan on a festival is, according to our Joseph, uncollectible by law, and rabbis say it is collectible. Our Joseph says, that it is uncollectible, because otherwise the lender will write it down, and rabbis says, if we say that it is uncollectible, the lender will not trust the borrower and the latter will not have the means of celebrating the festival. Is this not a contradiction to our Mishnah, which teaches, that if the man be refused trust, he may pledge his garment, etc.? If the loan be uncollectible, the pledging is quite right, but if it be collectible by law, why should the borrower pledge his garment? The lender can sue him by law. The lender might say, that he does not care to be troubled by lawsuits and judges. Arphivia would take pledges, and Rabba Bar Ula would trick the borrower, by in turn borrowing something from him after the holiday and holding that for a pledge. Mishnah, a man may count the number of his guests and also of his extra dishes verbally, but not from a written list. He may let his children and household draw lots at table, as to who is to have one dish, and who is to have another, provided he does not intentionally stake a larger portion against a smaller one. They may also draw lots for the holy sacrifices on a festival, as to which priest is to have one sacrifice and which is to have another, but not for the eatable portions of the sacrifices, to whom one piece belongs, and to whom another piece belongs. Gemara, why should a man not read from a written list seder, bibhai, lest he might strike out a guest's name or an extra dish from the list? Abaye said, this is a precautionary measure against reading of business papers on Sabbath. What is the point of difference between them? If the list is engraved on the wall, in that case there is no fear of striking out a name, but the precaution against reading business papers still remains, and the Amoraim differ in this case with the Tanaim in the following Tosefta. As we have learned, a man must not look into a mirror on Sabbath, lest he trim his hair with scissors, but our Meir permits looking into a mirror which is attached to a wall. Now, why may a man look into a stationary mirror? Because by the time he goes to fetch scissors, he will be reminded that it is Sabbath. Why not say, that the same is the case with another mirror, which he holds in his hand? By the time he lays down the mirror and goes for scissors, he will also be reminded that it is Sabbath. The mirror prohibited to be used by the first Tana of the Tosefta is one that is attached to an instrument which can be used to trim hair, and that is in accordance with the dictum of R. Naaman as stated by Rabbi Bar Abuha in his name. Why did the sages prohibit the use of an iron mirror? Because a man might use it to trim his superfluous hair. The rabbis taught, an inscription at the foot of pictures of beasts or men must not be read on the Sabbath, and gazing on the picture of a man is prohibited even on weekdays, because it is written, Leviticus 19. 4, Ye shall not turn unto the idols. With what tradition do you supplement this verse, that you may infer therefrom the prohibition to gaze at a picture? Said our Hanin, Ye shall not turn to the idols which your imagination alone hath created. He may let his children and household draw lots, etc. It says, his children and household. We must assume, that strangers are not to be included. If not, why not? As our Jehudah said in the name of Samuel, a party of men eating on a festival, where the portions distributed to each are exactly alike in size and quantity, are guilty of the following prohibited acts, viz. Measuring, weighing, counting, borrowing and lending 177, all of which acts are prohibited on a festival. According to Hillel's opinion, they are guilty of usury also. If that is so, why should it be allowed for his children and household? Here the reason is as related by R. Jehudah in the name of Rab, who said, it is allowed to borrow or lend from and to one's children and household and charge interest, in order to exemplify the evils of usury. If that is so, why is it not allowed, according to the Mishnah, to stake a larger portion against a smaller? As a matter of fact, it is allowed, but the Mishnah is defective and should read, he may let his children and household draw lots at table, and even stake a larger portion against a smaller. Why so? As our Jehudah said in the name of Rab above, he may let his children and household draw lots, but not strangers. Why so? As our Jehudah said in the name of Samuel above, a larger portion must not be staked against a smaller one even on weekdays for strangers. Why so? On account of Kubiah. 178, they may also draw lots for the holy sacrifices, etc. What is meant by, but not for the eatable portions? Why should that not be done? The eatable portions of the sacrifices must be eaten on a festival. Said our Jacob the son of the daughter of Jacob, that prohibition is only applicable to the eatable portions of the sacrifices left over from the preceding day. Is this not self-evident? I would say, that because it is written, Hosea 4. 4, and thy people are contentious equally with the priests, that the priests are contentious, and hence they should be permitted to cast lots for the eatable portions of the sacrifices, for the sake of peace. Therefore we are taught, that the sacrifices of the day may be drawn for, but not those of the preceding day. The same are, Jacob said, a man on whose account another man has been punished, either through divine or human judgment, is not admitted into the abode of the Holy One, blessed be he. Whence is this adduced? Shall we assume that it is, from the verses, 1 Kings 22. 20-22, and the Lord said, Who will persuade Achab, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth-Gilead? And one said, In this manner, and another said, In that manner. And there came forth a spirit, and placed himself before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. And the Lord said unto him, Wherewith? And he said, I will go forth, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, Thou wilt persuade him, and also prevail, go forth and do so. And it was asked who the spirit was, and Johanan said, It was the spirit of Naboth, and Rab said that by saying, Go forth, the Lord meant to expel the spirit from within his abode. Perhaps the reason for expelling the spirit was because it is written, Psalm ci. 7, He that speaketh falsehood shall not succeed before my eyes. Therefore we must say that the basis for Jacob is the following. It is written, Proverbs 17:26, To punish the just with a fine even is not good. This is explained to signify, that even punishment through a just man is not good. What is not good is certainly evil, and it is written, Psalms v5, For thou art not a God that hath pleasure in wickedness, evil cannot abide with thee, and this means, that, because thou, God, art righteous, evil cannot remain in thy abode. They may draw lots, etc. How do we know that the word, Kolashim 179 means lots? It is written, Isaiah 14:12, How art thou fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn? How art thou hewn down to the ground, crusher of nations? Crusher is expressed by the word, Kalesh, and the inference is made from the supposition that lots were cast which nation was to be crushed first. It is written, Daniel 4:33, And additional greatness was added unto me. What was that additional greatness? Said Jehudah in the name of Jeremiah bar Aba, from this we can infer, that he, Nebuchadnezzar, rode a male lion and twisted a snake round the lion's head, to verify what is written, Jeremiah 27:6, And also the beasts of the field have I given him to serve him. Mishnah, one must not hire laborers on the Sabbath, nor may he commission another man to hire them for him. One must not stand at the extreme limit of the Tekum 180 and wait for dusk, the end of Sabbath, in order to hire laborers, beyond the Tekum, or gather fruit beyond it, but if watching fruit beyond the Tekum, he may await the dusk at its extreme limit, and in that case bring the fruit back with him. Abba Saul laid down the rule, whatever I am permitted to prepare for the day following the Sabbath, on the Sabbath, I may get ready for at dusk. Gemara, what is the difference between a man and his neighbor? The Mishnah teaches he should not hire laborers on Sabbath nor commission another man to hire them for him. Is this not self-evident? His neighbor is also a Jew. Said Papa, that refers to a Gentile neighbor. Ashi opposed this, and said, the prohibition to commission a Gentile to do something on a Sabbath is merely rabbinical, for the sake of the Sabbath rest, Shputh 181, and to hire laborers on the Sabbath is also prohibited only by rabbinical law. How then can one rabbinical law be supplemented by another of the same character? Hence I may say, that the Mishnah refers to a Jewish neighbor and should be explained thus, a man must not commission him to hire laborers on Sabbath, but he may say to him, come to me after dusk and we will do something together. The Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Jehoshua ben Karha, as we have learned elsewhere. A man must not say to his neighbor, I would like to see thee after dusk for the purpose of talking business, and Jehoshua ben Karha says he may do so, and Rabbi bar Hannah in the name of Johanan taught, that the halakha prevails according to Jehoshua ben Karha. Rabbi bar Hannah in the name of Johanan said again, what reason did Jehoshua ben Karha have for saying so? Because it is written, Isaiah 58:13, by not following thy own business, and speaking vain words. It is not allowed to speak, but surely thinking is permitted. Arthaha bar Huna asked Rabbah concerning the following contradiction, how can we say, Johanan states, that though it is not allowed to speak it is allowed to think, did not Rabbi bar Hannah say in the name of Johanan, that everywhere it is allowed to think, excepting in a bathhouse and a toilet room, for where it is not allowed to speak of the law it is also not allowed to think of it. In that case it is different, for it is written, Deuteronomy 23:15, Therefore shall thy camp be holy, and a bathhouse and a toilet room cannot be holy, hence thinking of the law in those places is not allowed. Speaking of other things except the law is not permitted, on Sabbath. Did not our Hista and our Hamnuna both say, that it is allowed to count up charitable disbursements on Sabbath, and our Eleazar say, that one may figure out amounts to be distributed among the poor, on Sabbath, and our Jacob bar Edi say in the name of our Johanan, that all things pertaining to the saving of human beings or the affairs of the community may be discussed on Sabbath, and that it is allowed to go to the schoolhouses and call meetings for deliberation upon the community's business, and our Samuel bar Namani say in the name of our Johanan, that even halls may be visited for the purpose of calling business meetings together, and the disciples of Manasseh say, that betrothal of daughters may be discussed and the advisability of choosing a profession for a child may be deliberated upon, on the Sabbath. The passage cited in the law states, that, following thy business, is prohibited, but affairs sanctioned by heaven may be discussed, and all the above affairs are pleasing to the Lord. Our Jehudah said in the name of Samuel, accounts concerning which advice is requested by others and which have no bearing upon one's own business may be figured on the Sabbath. The following Baratha is cited in support of this. Accounts of disbursements in the past and of future expenditures must not be calculated on the Sabbath, but such as are of no importance, and concerning which advice was asked, may be calculated. Is the following Baratha not contradictory to the one cited? Accounts which are of no importance at all may be calculated on Sabbath, but not such as are of importance. How so? A man may say to his neighbor, I have hired so much labor to cultivate a certain field, or, I have expended so many dinars on such a dwelling, but he must not say, I have expended so much and must expend so much more. The contradiction arises from the fact that in the previous Baratha it is prohibited to calculate disbursements made in the past, while in the last Baratha it is permitted. But according to your opinion, why not cite the contradiction occurring in the previous Baratha itself, viz. Firstly, it is said that disbursements of the past must not be calculated, and then, that accounts of no value may be figured. This presents no contradiction at all, neither in the previous Baratha itself, nor from one to the other. If the disbursements of the past have already been made and nothing is owing, then the accounts of same are of no value and may be spoken of on the Sabbath, but if any amount of such expenditures is still due, then it becomes an important account and must not be discussed. One must not stand at the extreme limit of the tekum, etc. The rabbis taught, it once happened that the fence of the field belonging to a pious man was broken, and noticing it on a Sabbath, he was about to mend it, when he recollected that it was Sabbath, so he left it. A miracle occurred, and kaffir corn began to sprout in the place of the broken fence and furnished him and his family with their sustenance. Our Jehudah said in the name of Samuel, a man may say to his neighbor, tomorrow I intend to go to a certain town. Why may he say this? Because, if there are huts on the road to that town at distances of 70 ells apart, he may even go on Sabbath, hence, though there be no huts on the road, he may say that he intends going on the morrow. An objection was made, based upon our Mishnah, viz. One must not stand at the extreme limit of the tekum and wait for dusk in order to hire laborers or gather fruit. It would be quite right, if the hiring of laborers only was concerned, for a thing which must not be done on Sabbath must not be waited for at the tekum, but as for gathering fruit, if there were walls around the town, that would be permitted? Why, then, should it be prohibited to wait at the tekum until dusk? This may refer to fruit which was still attached to the ground, and could not be gathered on Sabbath even if the town had walls. How can this be said? Have we not learned that our Oshe taught, one must not wait at the tekum to bring straw and chaff? It would be correct concerning straw which is still attached to the ground, but how can this apply to chaff? This may refer to chaff which is used to mix with loam, and hence was designated for building purposes. Another objection was made. Come and hear, we have learned in the succeeding Mishnah, that nightfall may be awaited at the tekum in the case of a bride and corpse, hence for other purposes one must not await nightfall at the tekum. It would be quite right if it said, in the case of things pertaining to a bride, for instance to cut off a myrtle branch, but what things can be done pertaining to a corpse? Only the bringing of the coffin and the shroud? Why, then, should a man not be allowed to bring things which are the equivalent of the necessaries pertaining to a corpse? For if there were walls surrounding the town, he would be allowed to bring them. Why, then, should he not be permitted to wait at the tekum for the purpose of bringing them? Because the case may be, that things, as shrouds, pertaining to the corpse were not already prepared, but must be cut. But if watching fruit beyond the tekum, he may await the dusk, etc. May he do this even if he had not yet recited the Havdalah prayer? Why? Our Eleazar ben Antigonus said in the name of our Eleazar ben Jacob, that a man must not transact his business at the close of Sabbath, before reciting the Havdalah prayer. And if it be that he said the Havdalah prayer while reciting the evening prayer, did not our Jehudah in the name of Samuel say, that even if a man included the Havdalah prayer in the evening prayer, he must say it again over the goblet of wine? Should it then be said, that he said the prayer over the goblet also, how could he have done that in a field? This case refers to the time of wine pressing, when it is possible to obtain a goblet of wine even in the field, such is the explanation of our Nathan bar Ami to Rab. Said our Aba to our Ashi, in the West, Palestine, we simply say the benediction, blessed be he, etc., who distinguishes between holy and ordinary days, and go right to work. And our Ashi said, when we were in the house of our Kahana, he would pronounce the same benediction, and we would go and chop wood. Abba Saul laid down the rule, etc. Concerning what clause of the Mishnah does Abba Saul lay down this rule? Shall we assume that he refers to the first clause of the Mishnah, which decrees, that one must not stand at the extreme limit of the tekum and wait for dusk, and thus applies his rule? Then, instead of saying, whatever I am permitted to prepare, etc., he should have said in the negative, whatever I am not permitted to say to another man he should do for me, I must not wait at the tekum to do myself. If we assume, however, that the rule refers to the latter clause of the Mishnah, namely, but if watching fruit, he may await the dusk, etc., then Abba should have applied his rule to the contrary, viz. Whatever I am permitted to wait for at the tekum, I may tell another man to do for me. Abba Saul applies his rule to the latter clause of the Mishnah, and he refers to the following dictum of our Jehudah in the name of Samuel, viz. A man may say, to his neighbor, watch my fruit which is in your vicinity, and I will watch such of yours as is in my vicinity. This is commented upon by Abba Saul, addressing the first Tana as follows: you certainly admit that a man may say to his neighbor, watch my fruit in thy vicinity and I will watch thine in my vicinity. Now, say, whatever I am permitted to tell my neighbor to do, I am also permitted to wait for at the tekum to do it myself. What does Abba Saul intend to supplement by laying down a rule? He means to add what was taught by the rabbis, as follows: one must not wait at the tekum to bring home a stray animal, but if it is seen from the limits of the tekum, it may be called, so that it will come to within the tekum by itself. To this Abba Saul applied the rule, that if one may call to the animal, he may also wait at the tekum limits until dusk and bring it in himself. A man may also wait at the tekum limits to forward what is necessary for a bride, and also what is necessary for a corpse, to bring a coffin and shrouds for him, and we may say to him, go to a certain place and take it, and if thou dost not find it in that place, go to another place, and if thou canst not buy it for 100 zuz buy it for 200. Our Jose the son of our Jehudah said, one must not specify the amount the necessaries are to be bought for, but merely say, if thou canst not get it for little money, get it for more. Mishnah, one may await the dusk at the limits of the tekum, to furnish what is necessary for a bride and for a corpse, and to bring a coffin and shrouds for the latter. If a Gentile brought mourning fifes on the Sabbath, an Israelite must not play mourn on them, unless they be brought from the vicinity. If a coffin had been made and a grave dug for him, on the Sabbath, an Israelite may be buried therein, but if it was done on purpose for an Israelite, he must not at any time be buried therein. Gemara, what does the Mishnah mean by saying, unless they be brought from the vicinity? Rab said, by that is meant a place within sight, where one is positive that it was within the limits of the tekum. Samuel said, even if it is not positively known that they came from within the limits of the tekum, but where it is presumed that such is the case, the fifes may be used. Our Mishnah seems to be in accord with Samuel's explanation, because it says in the next clause, if a coffin had been made and a grave dug for him, an Israelite may be buried therein, and it does not say positively that the two things were done for a Gentile. Hence we see, that where an object is doubtful, we may presume that it is allowed. Thus in the case of the fiefs, if there is a doubt as to whence they were brought, they may nevertheless be used by an Israelite. We have learned in a Bereitha, however, a support to Rabbah's opinion, viz. A city which contains both Israelites and Gentiles, and there is a bathhouse there which is heated on the Sabbath, if the majority of the inhabitants are Gentiles, an Israelite may go there immediately after sunset on the Sabbath. If there are more Israelites than Gentiles there, the Israelite must wait the length of time required to heat water afresh before going to the bathhouse, and the same is the case in a city where there is an equal number of Jews and Gentiles. This is a support to Rab, because, though it is doubtful whether the bath was heated for a Jew or a Gentile, still, the Israelite must wait. R. Jehudah said, if the capacity of the bath be limited, so that water be heated quickly, and a notable man be present, the Israelite need not wait. What is meant by a notable man? Said R. Jehudah in the name of R. Itzhak the son of R. Jehudah, if there was a man present who had 10 servants, who could heat 10 jars of water at the same time, an Israelite might go and bathe himself. 182, if a coffin had been made and a grave dug for him, etc. Why should we not wait until the length of time in which a new grave can be dug elapses? Said Ulla, this refers to a paved way, where a grave is seldom dug for an Israelite, hence it must have been dug for a Gentile. What can be said in reference to the coffin? Said R. Abuha, if the coffin lie on the same grave. Mishnah, one may do all that is necessary for a corpse, on Sabbath, anoint and wash it, provided he does not dislocate its limbs. The pillow may be moved from under its head, the corpse may be put on sand, in order to keep it from putrefying, the longer, its jaws may be tied, not for the sake of bringing them together more closely, but to prevent them from dropping lower. In like manner, a beam that had been broken may be upheld by a stool or bedstead, not in order to make it erect again, but to keep it from breaking still more. Gemara, did not R. Jehudah in the name of Samuel say, that it once happened that a disciple of our Meir, while entering behind his master into the bathhouse, wished to rinse off a place for his master to sit down, and his master would not permit it, so he wanted to grease the steps with oil, but the master said that the floor must not be oiled. Hence we see, that a thing which must not be handled must not be anointed or washed. How then is it permitted to wash and anoint a corpse? If the floor of a bathhouse be allowed to be washed, there is fear lest another floor will be washed also, and thus smoothen any holes which may be in the floor, but a corpse and a floor cannot be confounded, and it is allowed to wash and anoint a corpse out of respect to the dead. What is meant to be supplemented by, all that is necessary for a corpse? They meant to add what was taught by the rabbis, viz. One may bring vessels for cooling the corpse, or iron vessels may be put on the belly of the corpse to keep it from swelling, and one may stop up any holes in the corpse to keep the air from entering. Mishnah, one must not close the eyes of the dead on the Sabbath, nor, even, on the weekday, while he is expiring. Whoever closes the eyes of a dying person the instant he expires, is equal to the man who sheds blood, like a murderer. Gemara, the rabbis taught, who closes the eyes of a dying man is like a murderer, for it is the same as a candle which is about to go out. If a man lays a finger on the flame, it immediately becomes extinguished, but if left alone would still burn for a little time. The same can be applied to the case of an expiring man, if his eyes were not closed, he would live a little longer, and hence it is like murder. We have learned in a Bereitha, our Simeon ben Gamaliel said, one who wishes that the eyes of a corpse should close, should inject wine into the nostrils of the corpse and anoint the eyelids with a little oil, and then pull the big toes of the feet, when the eyelids will close of themselves. We have learned in another Bereitha, one should violate the Sabbath even for a child of 1 day, if it still have life, but for a corpse, even be it that of David, king of Israel, the Sabbath must not be violated. The reason for this is, for a child of even 1 day, the Sabbath should be violated, saith the Torah, in order that it may keep many Sabbaths in the future, but David, king of Israel, when dead, can keep no more commandments. This is in accord with the saying of our Johanan, viz. It is written, Psalms 88. 6, free among the dead, etc., which means, that when a man is dead, he is free from keeping any commandments. We have also learned in a Beratha, our Simeon ben Eleazar said, a child of a day need not be guarded from the attacks of cats and dogs, but even when Og the king of Bashan is dead he must be guarded, as it is written, Genesis 9:2, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, etc. Hence, as long as a man lives, the beasts are in dread of him, but as soon as he is dead, the fear is destroyed. We have learned in another Beratha, our Simeon ben Eleazar said, as long as thou canst, practice charity, as long as thou hast the opportunity and as long as it is in thy hands. For Solomon said in his wisdom, Ecclesiastes 12:1, but remember also thy Creator in the days of thy youthful vigor, while the evil days, meaning old age, are not yet come, nor those years draw nigh of which thou wilt say, I have no pleasure in them. By that is meant, the days of the Messiah, because at that time there will be neither rich nor poor, all will be rich, and no opportunity for charity will present itself. This differs with the teaching of Samuel, who says, that there is no difference between the present time and the days of Messiah, only that one is subject to the government at the present time, while then it will not be so, as it is written, Deuteronomy 15:11, for the needy will not cease out of the land. We have learned in a Beratha, our Eleazar Hakapar said, a man should always pray for deliverance from poverty, although if he himself will not eventually come to poverty, his children or his grandchildren will, as it is written, Deuteronomy 15:11, for the needy will not cease out of the land, therefore do I command thee, etc. The Hebrew term for, therefore, is, biglal, and the school of Ishmael taught that biglal is the equivalent of galgal, meaning a wheel, thus inferring, from that word, that poverty is like a wheel, always turning from one to the other. R. Joseph said, there is a tradition extant, that a diligent young scholar will never become poor. But we see that he sometimes does become poor. Still, we have never seen one so poor that he had to beg his bread from house to house. Said our Haya to his wife, if thou sayest a man about to beg bread from thee, hasten to give it to him, that he might at some other time do likewise for thy children. Said she to him, art thou cursing thy children? Nay, I am simply quoting the verse above, as interpreted by the school of Ishmael, that poverty is a wheel continually turning. We have learned in a Beratha, Rabban Gamaliel the Great 183 said thus, it is written, Deuteronomy 17:18, and grant thee mercy and have mercy upon thee, and multiply thee, etc. This means to say, that one who hath mercy upon creatures will be granted mercy from above, but one who hath not mercy upon other creatures will not be granted mercy from above. It is written, Ecclesiastes 12:2, while the sun, and the light, and the moon, and the stars are not yet darkened. The sun and the light are compared to the brow and the nose, the moon to the soul, the stars to the cheeks, and further, the verse reads, and the clouds return not again after the rain, which means, that after weeping the eyes become dim. The entire verse is, according to this interpretation, not applicable to the end of the world but to a human life. Samuel said, up to 40 years of age, the eyes of a man which have become dim through tears may yet be restored by different remedies, but beyond that age there is no remedy for them, and R. Naaman said, the dye used for the eyes makes them brighter until a man is 40 years of age, after that age, however, it may preserve the eyes, but does not help them even if the eyes are filled with dye. What are we given to understand by this statement? We are told that, the larger the brush used for applying the dye to the eye, the better it is for the eyes. One of our Hanina's daughters died, and he did not weep over her death. Said his wife to him, was a hen carried out of thy house? Is it not sufficient that our child died, wouldst thou have me lose my eyes through weeping? Replied our Hanina, and he is of the opinion of our Johanan, who said in the name of our Jose ben Katsartha, there are 6 kinds of tears in the eyes, 3 of which are good for the eyes and 3 bad. Tears generated by smoke, weeping, or disorder of the bowels are bad for the eyes, but those that are caused through laughing, acrid fruits, such as mustard, and medicaments which are applied to produce tears, are good for the eyes. It is written, Ecclesiastes 12:3, on the day when the watchman of the house will tremble, this refers to the bowels and the sides which protect the bowels, the men of might will bend themselves, meaning the legs of the man, and those be darkened that look through the windows, refers to the eyes. Caesar asked of our Jehoshua ben Hananiah, "Why didst thou not come to the debating rooms?" And he answered, "The mountain is covered with snow," meaning his head was gray, "the surrounding paths are icy," meaning his beard was gray, "the dogs do not bark any more," meaning his voice was inaudible, and the millstones grind no more, meaning his teeth were decayed. The school of Rab would say of an old man, "He hath lost nothing and is constantly seeking," meaning that he was always bowed down. We have learned in a Beretha, our Jose bar Kisma said, "Two are better than three," referring to 2 legs, instead of 2 legs and a stick. "Woe is to the one who goeth away and doth not return," so said he. What does he mean by it? Said our Hista, youth. When our Dimi came from Palestine, he said, "Youth is a crown of roses, and old age a crown of thorns." We have learned in the name of our Mayor, "Be heedful of thy teeth and thou wilt show it in thy step," as it is written, Jeremiah 44:17, "When we had plenty of food and fared well and saw no evil." Said Samuel to his disciple our Jehudah, "Thou sagacious man. When thou goest to eat, untie thy stomacher and bring in thy bread." Before the age of 40, eating is more wholesome, but after that, drinking is better. A eunuch, who was a Sadducee, said to our Jehoshua, was bald-headed, with the intent to tease him, "How far is it from here to Bald City?" And he answered, "Just as far as from here to Castrate City." The eunuch said again, "I noticed that a bald goat only cost 4 zuz, and our Jehoshua said, "Yeah. And I noticed that the privates which were cut away from a he-goat cost 8 zuz." The eunuch noticed that our Jehoshua did not wear shoes, and said, "He who rides a horse is a king, he who rides an ass is a nobleman, he who wears shoes is at least a man, but he who does not even wear shoes is worse off than a corpse in his grave." Said our Jehoshua, "Thou eunuch! Thou hast told me 3 things, and 3 things thou shalt presently hear from me: the beauty of the face is a beard, the joy of the heart is a wife, and God's inheritance is children. Blessed be the place that has kept thee from all these joys." The eunuch retorted, "Thou bald head! Wouldst thou quarrel with me?" And our Jehoshua replied, "Thou eunuch! Thou earnest to tease me." Rabbi said to our Simeon the son of Halaphtah, "Why did we not have the pleasure of thy company on the festivals, as our parents had the pleasure of thy parents' company?" And he answered, "The hills have become mountains, those who were near have become distant, 2 have become 3, and the peacemaker of the house is gone," meaning, I have become old, can make but short steps, must have a cane to lean on, and my teeth are gone. It is written, Ecclesiastes 12:4, "And when the 2 doors on the streets will be locked, while the sound of the mill becometh dull, and man riseth up at the voice of the bird," and means, that in old age a man's stomach refuses to digest and he cannot excrementize, and he becomes so weak that the least sound, such as piping of a bird, will awaken him from his slumbers. Even so said Barzillai the Gileadite to King David, 2 Samuel 19:36, "I am 80 years old this day, can I discern between good and evil?" which proves to us that the mind of an old man changes, and further, it says, "Or can thy servant taste what I eat or what I drink?" From this we see that an old man's sense of taste is lost, and further, again, "Or can I listen yet to the voice of singing men and singing women?" which proves to us that old men become hard of hearing. Said Rab, Barzillai the Gileadite was a liar, for the servant who was in the house of Rabbi was 92 years old, and she would taste all the dishes that were being cooked. Said Rabbah, Barzillai was a lascivious man, and a man of that kind ages very rapidly and loses all his senses. We have learned in a Beretha, our Ishmael bar our Jose said, "The older scholars become, the more wisdom comes to them," as it is written, Job 12:12, "So is with the ancients wisdom, and with those of length of days understanding." With ignorant men, however, it is different. The older they become, the more ignorant they are, as it is written, Ibid 20, "He removeth the speech from trusty speakers and taketh away the intelligence of the aged." It is written, Ecclesiastes 12:5, "Also when men will be afraid of every elevation." To an aged man, even a little hillock appears as a high mountain, and are terrified on every way, and they are afraid of everything on their way, and the almond tree will refuse its blossom, meaning that the joints of the limbs will refuse to do their duty, and the locust will drag itself slowly along, and the desire will gainsay compliance, means that the desires of old men wane. Said our Kahana, what is written, Psalms 33. 9, for he spoke, and it came into being, refers to a woman, and he commanded, and it stood fast, refers to children. It is written, Ecclesiastes 12. 5, because man goeth to his eternal home. Said our Itzhak, this proves that every righteous man is given a dwelling in the world to come according to his merit, and this is like a king with his slaves entering a city. They all enter through one gate, but when night comes every man is given a berth in accordance with his rank. Our Itzhak said again, it is written, Ecclesiastes 11. 10, for childhood and the time when the head is black 184 are vanity, and means to say, that the deeds committed in youth blacken the reputation in old age. Our Itzhak said again, the worms are as disagreeable to a corpse as pricks of needles are to a man, even if an excrescence only is pricked, as it is written, Job 14. 22, but his body on him feeleth pain, and his soul will mourn for him. Our Hista said, the soul of a man mourns for him the first 7 days after his death, and that is based upon an analogy of expression, viz., it is written, Genesis L. 10, and he made for his father a mourning of 7 days, and the verse in Job previously quoted also contains the word mourn, hence the analogy. Our Jehudah said, if a corpse has left none to mourn him, 10 men should go to the place where he died and mourn his death. A stranger, who had none to mourn him, died in the neighborhood of our Jehudah, so every day our Jehudah took 10 men, went to the place where the stranger died, and mourned for him. After 7 days, the spirit of the stranger appeared to our Jehudah in a dream, and said to him, may thy heart be as light as thou hast made mine. Said our Fabuha, all that is said in the presence of a corpse is known to the latter, until he is buried and the earth is thrown on top of him. Our Haya and our Simeon Bar Rabbi differ concerning this, one says, until the corpse is buried, and the other, until the flesh is decomposed. He who says until the flesh is decomposed, bases his assertion on the previously cited verse, but his body on him feeleth pain, and his soul will mourn him. The other, who says, only until he is buried, bases his assertion upon the verse, Ecclesiastes 12. 7, when the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return unto God who gave it. The rabbis taught, return the soul to the Lord as clean as he gave it to thee. This is illustrated by a parable of a king who once gave to his attendants suits of clothes. The wise among them took care of them, kept them clean and folded, and used them on special occasions only. The fools put them on and performed their work in them. Naturally, the clothes became dirty. All at once, the king demanded the clothes back again. The wise men returned them clean and whole, but the fools returned them in a dirty and dilapidated condition. The king was well pleased with the wise men, and told them to depart in peace, and had their clothes stored, but the clothes of the fools he ordered to be sent to the washers, and the fools were sent to prison. So does also the Holy One, blessed be he. Concerning the bodies of the righteous men, he saith, Isaiah 57. 2, he shall come in peace, they shall repose in their resting place, and concerning the souls he saith, 1 Samuel 25. 29, yet will the soul of my Lord be bound in the bond of life with the Lord thy God. Concerning the bodies of the wicked, he saith, Isaiah 68. 22, there is no peace, saith the Lord, unto the wicked, and concerning the souls of the wicked, he saith, 1 Samuel 25. 29, and the soul of thy enemies will he hurl away, as out of the middle of the sling. We have learned, our Eliezer said, the souls of righteous men are deposited underneath the throne of honor, as it is written, yet will the soul of my Lord be bound in the bond of life, and the souls of the wicked are crowded together until they are crushed, as it is written, the souls of thy enemies will he hurl away. How is it with the souls of men who are neither righteous nor wicked? Asked Rabbah of our Naaman. He answered, if I were dead, ye would not know it. Samuel said, the souls of the righteous, of the ordinary men, and of the wicked are given over to the angel whose name is Doma, who has charge of all souls. The souls of the righteous are given their resting place soon, the others are not given rest until they come before the divine judgment. Said Mari, the bodies of righteous men also decompose, as it is written, when the dust will return to the earth, as it was. Diggers were digging some earth belonging to Naaman. They came to the grave where Bachai bar Yashia was buried, and the corpse scolded them. The diggers came to Naaman, and told him that a man who was buried on his ground had scolded them. So Naaman went himself to the grave, and asked, Who art thou, master? And the man in the grave answered, I am called Achai bar Yashia. Said Naaman to him, Did not Mari say, that the bodies of the righteous shall turn to dust? And the corpse replied, Who is this Mari? I know him not. But Naaman persisted, It is written, when the dust shall return to the earth, as it was. And the corpse retorted, He who taught the Ecclesiastes, did not teach thee Proverbs, where it is written, ch. 14. 30, Jealousy is the rottenness of the bones, and if thy teacher had explained this to thee, thou wouldst have known, that he who hath jealousy in his heart, his bones shall rot after death, but he who hath no jealousy in his heart, his bones shall not rot. Thereupon Naaman felt the dead man's bones, and truly they were sound. So he said to him, Let the master arise and go home with me for a while. And the dead man answered, By this remark thou hast proven to me that thou hast not even studied the prophets, for it is written, Ezekiel 37. 13, And ye shall know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves, and when I cause you to come up out of your graves, for this would tell thee, that only the Lord can make me arise, and still thou askest me to go with thee. Yea, quoth Naaman, but there is another passage, Genesis 3. 19, For dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. This will, however, be only 1 hour before the final resurrection, answered the corpse. A certain Sadducee said to Abuha, Ye say that the souls of the righteous are deposited underneath the throne of honor. How, then, could the woman of the familiar spirit whom King Saul consulted, 185 bring up the soul of Samuel? Abuha answered, That happened during the first 12-month after the death of Samuel, as we have learned in a Beratha, that during the first 12-month the souls of the deceased come up and down, but after that period the soul ascends to heaven and does not return. Said Jehudah, the son of Samuel bar Shelah, in the name of Rab, from the funeral sermon held over the remains of the deceased, it may be observed whether they will enter the kingdom of heaven or not. If the funeral sermon is in the form of a eulogy and the deceased was much beloved, it can be presumed that he will have a happy time in the beyond. This is not so. For did not Rab say to Samuel bar Shelah, See that thou makest my funeral oration exceeding touching, for I shall be there. Jehudah meant to say, that when the sermon is touching, and elicits a responsive chord in the breasts of the audience, for some orations may be made ever so touching, but if the deceased was not deserving, it will produce no effect whatever. Said Abai to Rabbah, Thou, master, who hast not a single friend in Pumbeditha, who will mourn thy death. Thou and Rabbah bar Hannah will suffice, answered Rabbah. Asked Rab, Who is the man that will live in the world to come? He answered by quoting the verse, Isaiah XXX. 21, And thy ears shall hear the word behind thee, saying, This is the way, walk ye in it, when ye turn to the right hand and when ye turn to the left. 186 Hanina said, The man who gives satisfaction to our masters. It is written, Ecclesiastes 12. 5, And the mourners go about the streets. The Galilean said, Do such things as will be spoken of to thy credit in thy funeral sermon, and the Judean said, Do such things as will be spoken of after thy burial. There is no difference in the two statements, for in Galilee the funeral sermon was held before burial, and in Judea after burial. We have learned, in the Mishnah Abhoth, 1 day before thy death, thou shalt repent of thy sins, said Eliezer, and his disciples asked him, Can a man know on which day he will die? And he answered, For just that reason, he should repent today, lest he die tomorrow. Thus all his days will be spent in repentance. So also hath Solomon said in his wisdom, Ecclesiastes 9. 8, At all times let thy garments be white, and let not oil be wanting on thy head. Commenting upon this, Our Johanan ben Zakkai said, "This is illustrated by a parable about a king who invited his retainers to a banquet, but did not state the time. The wise among them dressed and were ready, standing in front of the palace, for they said, 'In a king's house nothing is wanting.' Perhaps the banquet takes place today." The fools, however, went about their business, saying, "Can a banquet be given without preparation?" Suddenly the king called in his retainers to the banquet. The wise went in becomingly attired, while the fools went in their working clothes. The king was well pleased with the wise, and angry with the fools, and said, "Those that are prepared and attired for the banquet shall sit down, eat, drink, and be merry, but those that are not, shall stand and look on, but shall receive nothing." Said the son-in-law of our mayor, in the latter's name, "Then it would appear as if those standing were waiting upon those who were sitting, and they would not be ashamed. They were also to sit down, but while the others ate they would be hungry, and while the others drank they would remain thirsty, as it is written, Isaiah LXV 13 and 14, "Therefore, thus hath said the Lord Eternal, Behold, my servants shall eat, but ye shall be hungry, behold, my servants shall drink, but ye shall be thirsty, behold, my servants shall rejoice, but ye shall be made ashamed, behold, my servants shall sing for joy of heart, but ye shall cry out from pain of heart, and from a broken spirit shall ye howl, and on this account it is written, At all times let thy garments be white," etc. 24. Regulations concerning a man who is overtaken by dusk on the eve of Sabbath while traveling, and concerning feeding of cattle. Mishnah, one who, on the eve of Sabbath, is overtaken by the dusk on the road must give his purse to a Gentile, while it is yet day. If there is no Gentile with him, he must put it on the ass. As soon as he arrives at the outmost court, dwelling of the first town or village he reaches, he must take off all such things as may be handled on the Sabbath, and as for the things which must not be handled he must loosen the cords, so that they fall off themselves. Gemara, why was it allowed for a man to give his purse to the Gentile accompanying him? He, the Gentile, acts for him. Because it was known to the rabbis that a man is anxious about his money, and if it were not allowed, he might carry it himself in public ground. Said Rabbah, he may do this with his own purse, but if he found something, he must not have it carried for him. Is this not self-evident? Did we not learn in the Mishnah, his purse? We might assume that the same would apply to something found, and the Mishnah says only his purse, because that is the usual occurrence, hence Rabbah teaches us as mentioned. Even in the case of something which was found, the prohibition applies only if the man had not yet had it in his hand, but if he had, it is regarded the same as his purse. If there is no Gentile with him, etc. If there is a Gentile with him, he must give his purse to the Gentile. Why not put it on the ass in the first place? Because concerning the ass there is a commandment to let it rest, but no such commandment exists for a Gentile. How is the case if the man had accompanying him an ass, a deaf-mute, 187 an idiot, and a minor? To whom must he give his purse in that event? He must put it on the ass. Why so? Because the deaf-mute and the minor are human beings, and he might by accident give it to an Israelite who was not a deaf-mute or a minor. How is it if he had with him a deaf-mute and an idiot only? He must give it to the idiot, because a deaf-mute has more sense than an idiot. How is it with an idiot and a minor? He must give it to the idiot. All this has been finally decided, but the question that presented itself to the schoolmen was, to whom the purse must be given if the man had with him a deaf-mute and a minor. Some say he should give it to the deaf-mute, and others, to the minor. How is it if the man have nobody along, no Gentile, no ass, no deaf-mute, no idiot, and no minor? What should he do then? Said our Itzhak, there was another mode of procedure, which the sages would not reveal. What was that? He should carry it less than 4 ells at a time, carry it a little less than 4 ells and stop, then start and carry it on again for less than 4 ells, and so on. Why would the sages not reveal this? Because it is written, Proverbs 25. 2. It is the honor of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. Where is the honor of God concerned in this matter? Perhaps the man will not stop, but go on and carry it over 4 ells. We have learned in a Beretha, our Eliezer said, on the day when the 18 precautionary measures were instituted in the attic of Hananiah ben Hizkiah ben Gerin, this measure concerning the purse of the traveler was also instituted, viz., that he should not carry it but give it to the Gentile, and the measure of laws was made heaping full. Jehoshua, however, says, that the measure was smoothened in too great a degree, 188, and we have learned that Eliezer meant to say what his simile illustrates, viz. There was a basket filled with cucumbers and beets to the brim, and if a man put in mustard seed, there is an addition, without, however, forcing out anything else. Thus the measure was full, but not overflowing. Jehoshua, however, compares it as follows: there was a tub filled with honey, and nuts were thrown into it, in consequence of which the honey overflowed and some was spilled. This means, that by the institution of those precautionary measures the Mosaic laws were undermined. The Master said, if there was no Gentile with him, he should put it on the ass. How is it that he may do this? If he put it on the ass, he will be compelled to drive the ass, and surely this is also labor, which is prohibited on the Sabbath, as it is written, Exodus XX. 10, on it thou shalt not do any work. Said ʻtæl, the man must put the purse on the ass, while the latter is walking along. In that case, no transfer from one fixed point takes place, because while both are walking it cannot be said that the purse is resting in one particular place. It is, however, impossible that the ass should not rest at some place for a little while. When the ass rests, the man removes the purse, and when it commences to walk again, he puts it back. If that is so, it would be the same if he would transfer his purse to a fellow Israelite while walking, and he would never be guilty of the act of transferring from one fixed place and depositing in another. Said Papa, an act which, if committed by one man unassisted, would make him liable for a sin offering, e.g., if he, while running or walking, should pick up something off the ground even without stopping, he would become liable for a sin offering. He must not commit with the assistance of a companion, but if he did so, he is not liable for a sin offering, e.g., if he picked up a thing and placed it on his companion while the latter was walking. In that event neither is culpable, for the one did not deposit it in a fixed place, and the other did not remove it from a fixed place. Such acts, however, as must not be committed with the aid of a companion may be done with the assistance of an ass in the first place. ʻtæl said again, if a man has a bundle on his shoulders before dusk on the Sabbath while on the road, he may run with the burden until he reaches home, but he must not walk his usual gait. Why so? Because, if he walks in the usual manner, he might stop, and by stopping carry out the prohibited transfer from one fixed point and depositing in another. When he reaches home, however, he must stop for some time, and thus he would bring a thing from public ground into private ground. The remedy for this is, to throw the bundle from his shoulders backwards, and not in the usual manner. Rabbah the brother of Mari bar Rachel taught the following decree in the name of Johanan: one who drives cattle on the Sabbath, even if they are burdened, is free. Why so? If he did so unintentionally, he cannot be liable for a sin offering, because Sabbath laws are identical with those of idolatry. In like manner, as a man cannot be guilty of idolatry unless he worship with his own body, so it is with the Sabbatical law. If he perform labor through the medium of his cattle, without doing any himself, he cannot be guilty. Even if he did it intentionally, he is also not guilty. Why so? Because we have learned in a Mishnah, Tract Sanhedrin, among those who are subject to capital punishment, by stoning, is he who violates the Sabbath by an act which, if done intentionally, carries with it such punishment, stoning, and which, if done unintentionally, makes one liable for a sin offering. Hence, if the unintentional performance of such an act does not carry with it liability to bring a sin offering, its intentional performance cannot carry with it the punishment of stoning, nor the punishment of stripes, because, where the penalty for the violation of a negative commandment is death, stripes cannot be inflicted, and even according to the Tana who holds that stripes can be inflicted for such violation, in this case it could not be done, because, were the verse to be read, thou shalt not do any labor, nor thy cattle, it would be right, but the verse distinctly says, thou shalt not do any labor, neither thou, etc. nor thy cattle. Hence, when the work was not done jointly by the man and his cattle, he cannot be punished in any manner for a violation of the Sabbath. As soon as he arrives at the outmost court, etc. Said Huna, if the ass was laden with glassware, he may bring cushions and place them on the ground, so that when he loosens the cords the glassware may fall on the cushions and escape being broken. We have learned, however, that such vessels as may be handled on the Sabbath may be removed from the ass, and why may not the glassware be handled? Huna refers to glassware which belongs to a surgeon, and being dirty, bloody, is unfit for use in a household. In that case, then, the man would render the cushions which he places on the ground to receive the falling glassware unfit for their proper use, and this is prohibited on the Sabbath. The cushions are only to be used in order to break the fall of the glassware, and after the glassware rolls off onto the ground, the cushions can be used as before. We have learned in a Beretha, Simeon ben Jokai said, if a sheaf of grain, the tithes of which had not yet been separated, is on the back of the ass, the man may push it off with his head, so that it fall to the ground. The ass of Gamaliel was once laden with honey, and, the Sabbath having set in, Gamaliel would not allow the ass to be unloaded until the Sabbath was over. This proved too much for the animal and it dropped dead. We have learned in the Mishnah, that such things as may be handled on Sabbath may be removed from the animal. Why was not the honey removed? The honey had become spoiled. If the honey was spoiled, why was it brought? It was intended to be used for the bruises on camels. Then the cord should have been loosened and the honey allowed to fall off. The honey was in inflated skins, and would have burst if allowed to fall. Then cushions should have been placed on the ground to receive them. The cushions would have become soiled, and thus rendered unfit for use. Pity should have been taken on the animal, and it should not have been allowed to stand laden all day. Pity for animals is only a rabbinical institution according to Gamaliel, and thus he could not observe it lest he violate the Sabbath. Abayi once saw Rabbah playing with his little son, and setting him on the back of an ass, so he said to him, "Why does master use an animal on Sabbath?" And Rabbah answered, "This cannot be called using an animal in the regular manner, but just incidental use, and that was not prohibited by the rabbis." Abayi objected, "Have we not learned that if 2 walls of a booth, to be used on the Feast of Tabernacles, were made by hand, and the 3rd wall was already made by a tree, the booth might be used for ritual purposes, but it is not allowed to ascend to the roof of the booth on a festival, because the tree serves as a support to the roof, and by ascending the roof the tree would be used, which is prohibited." Hence we see that, although that would be incidental and not direct use, still it is prohibited. Rabbah answered, "In the case cited by thee, a tree is referred to, the branches of which were also part of the roof." The Mishnah seems to have this meaning attributed to it by Rabbah, for in a later clause it is stated, that should the tree, which partly supports the booth, be removed, and the booth can stand by itself, one may ascend it, hence the tree is regarded as an independent wall. Mishnah, one may untie bundles of straw for cattle, also strew stalks for them, but one must not undo tied bundles of zirin. 189 herbs used as fodder, and caropods, must not be cut up for cattle, large or small. Jehuda permits the cutting up of caropods for small cattle. Gemara, said Huna, there is no difference between bundles of straw and stalks, except that the former are tied twice while the latter are trebly tied, and by zirin is meant the young branches of a cedar tree, which when young are still tender and are eaten by cattle, and the Mishnah should be explained thus: one may untie bundles of straw for cattle, and also strew them, and the same may be done with stalks, but not with zirin. The latter must neither be untied nor strewn. Said Hista, what reason has Huna for explaining the Mishnah in this manner? He means to say, that on account of such things as are already proper fodder for cattle one may trouble himself on Sabbath, but on account of such as must first be prepared as fodder, one should not trouble himself. Jehuda, however, says, that bundles of straw and zirin are identical, except that the former were tied twice and the latter trebly, but stalks signify cedar boughs, and he explains the Mishnah thus: we may untie bundles of straw for cattle, but not strew them, stalks may also be strewn, the zirin, however, may be untied, but not strewn. Said Rabbah, what is the reason for our Jehuda's explanation? He holds that we may prepare things for the use of cattle, but we must not trouble ourselves on account of such things as are already fit fodder for cattle. An objection was made to the foregoing. Based on the latter clause of the Mishnah, herbs used for fodder and caropods must not be cut up for cattle. As herbs are mentioned in conjunction with caropods, we must assume that as the herbs were soft, so were also the caropods, and, it being prohibited to cut them up, we see that with such things as are already proper fodder we must not trouble ourselves, and this is contrary to the dictum of our Huna. Our Huna might say to the contrary, that as the caropods are hard, so also are the herbs. Where do we find that herbs should be cut up for cattle? They generally eat them as they are. This refers to young calves and mule colts. Another objection was raised. Come and bear, one may cut up pumpkins for cattle and carrion for dogs. Then we may say, that as carrion is soft, so also are the pumpkins, and hence we see, that we may trouble ourselves even with such articles as are already fit fodder for cattle, and this is contradictory to our Jehuda's opinion. Our Jehuda might say to the contrary, that as the pumpkins were hard, so was also the carrion. How can that be? Supposing it was the carcass of an elephant, or the dogs were young and could not eat carrion without having it cut up for them. Mishnah, a camel must not be crammed, to fatten it, nor may it be forced to eat, but the food may be put into its mouth. Calves must not be crammed, but the food may be put into their mouths. Poultry may be fed and crammed, water may be poured on bran, but the bran must not be kneaded. One must not put water before bees, or before doves in a dovecot, but one may put it before geese, before poultry, and before house pigeons. Gemara, what is meant by, must not be crammed? Said our Jehuda. By that is meant, that the stomach of the camel should not be turned into a feed bag. Can such a thing be done? Said our Jeremiah of Difti, yeah, I saw with my own eyes, that an itinerant merchant fed his camel a measure of grain, and when it had consumed that, he forced another measure down its throat. Calves must not be crammed, but the food may be put into their mouths, etc. What is the difference between cramming and putting food into the calf's mouth? Our Jehuda said, that cramming is accomplished when the food is stuffed down into the calf's mouth so that it cannot eject it, and putting food into its mouth is merely as is implied by the term, and our Hista said, that in both cases the food is forced down so far that the calf cannot eject it, but in cramming, some instrument is used, and the other is done by hand. Our Joseph objected, we have learned in a Beretha, that poultry may be crammed, and so much the more food may be given to the poultry a little at a time. The contrary is the case with doves. Food must not be given them even a little at a time, and much less may they be crammed. Now what is the difference between cramming and forcing them to eat a little at a time? Shall we assume that by cramming is meant, forcing the food down by hand, and by giving them food a little at a time is meant, throwing it to them? If so, why should doves not be fed in that manner? Is it then prohibited to throw them food? We must therefore say, that in both cases the food is given by hand, but in cramming the food is forced down so that it cannot be ejected, while in the other case it can be ejected. If this applies to poultry, then we must certainly assume that, as for calves, cramming is done by forcing the food down with an instrument, and this would be contradictory to our Jehuda. Our Jehuda might say, that by feeding poultry is meant, throwing food to them, and the reason that one must not feed doves is because they do not belong to him, whereas poultry belongs to him and must be fed by him, as we have learned in a Beretha, that one may give food to a dog but not to a pig, and the reason is, that a man is in duty bound to feed his dog, but a pig that he does not own he need not feed. Said our Ashi, this we also learn from our Mishnah, one must not put it before bees, or before doves in a dovecot, but we may put it before geese, poultry, and house pigeons. We must assume the reason of the Mishnah to be because one is not obliged to take care of the bees and doves, but must take care of those which he owns. According to this, then, why is water only spoken of, why not wheat or barley? We must say, that water is easily obtainable, and hence there is no necessity to trouble oneself on that account. Our Jonah taught at the door of Nasi, it is written, Proverbs 29. 7. The righteous considereth the cause of the indigent. The righteous, synonymous with the Holy One, blessed be he, knoweth that a dog hath not much food, and hath thus ordained, that the food in his stomach remains undigested for 3 days, as we have learned in a Mishnah. How long must the food, carrion, remain in the stomach, that it may still be considered unclean? In the stomach of a dog 3 days, but in the stomach of a bird or a fish only as long as it would take it to burn up if thrown into the fire. Said Hamnuna, from what was said above, it may be implied that one may throw food before a dog. How much? Said Mari, a small piece, and the dog should immediately be driven off. This refers to a dog in the field, but within the city a strange dog should not be fed at all, lest he run after the man. However, a dog belonging to him may be fed. Said Papa, there is nothing poorer than a dog, and nothing richer than a pig, meaning that a dog is very fastidious about food, while a pig will eat anything. We have learned in a Baratha, in support of the dictum of our Jehuda, what is the difference between cramming and putting food into the mouth of a calf. Cramming is accomplished by laying the calf down, forcing open its mouth, and stuffing it with soaked grain, and putting food into its mouth is merely feeding and watering it separately, while the calf is standing. Poultry may be fed and crammed, etc. Said Abai, I asked my master, with whose opinion was the Mishnah in conformity, and he told me with that of our Jose bar Jehuda, as we have learned, water must not be poured on bran, said Rabbi, but our Jose bar Jehuda said that it may be done. The rabbis taught, when water is poured on parched corn the corn must not be kneaded on Sabbath, but others say that it may be kneaded. Who is meant by others? Said our Hista, our Jose bar Jehuda. Such is the case, however, only when it is done differently than on a weekday. How can it be done differently? By kneading a little at a time and not in a lump. All agree, however, that Shtitha 190 may be kneaded on the Sabbath, and that Egyptian beer may be drunk. Was it not said, that kneading was not allowed on Sabbath? This presents no difficulty. Fine corn may be kneaded, but coarse must not, and even then it must be kneaded differently than on a weekday. How can this be done? On weekdays the vinegar is first put in and then the shtitha, and on Sabbath the latter should be put in first. Levi the son of our Huna bar Haya once found the herder of his father's cattle pouring water on bran and giving it to the cattle. He scolded him. Afterwards our Huna met his son, and said to him, Thus said the father of thy mother in the name of Rab, meaning our Jeremiah bar Aba, it is allowed to pour water on bran but not to put the mixed bran into the mouth of the cattle, but young cattle, that cannot eat themselves, may be fed by hand. And this may be done, providing it is done differently than on a weekday. How should that be done? The bran should only be stirred once lengthwise and once crosswise. It will not mix well, however, in this manner. Said our Jehuda, then it should be poured into another vessel. We found in the diary of Zerah, I asked of my master our Haya, whether kneading was permitted on the Sabbath, and he said, No. I asked him whether transferring from one vessel to another was permitted, and he said it was. Said our Manasseh, it is allowed to give one animal a measure of grain, and 2 measures for 2 animals, but one must not give 3 measures for 2 animals. Our Joseph, however, said that a whole cab, or even 2 cobs, may be given for 1 or 2 or 3 animals, and Ulla said that even a kur or more may be given. It was written in the diary of Levi, I related in the presence of my master, who was Rabbi the Holy, Jehuda Hanassi, that in Babylon they were kneading shtitha on Sabbath and Rabbi protested against it, but no one paid attention to it, and he had no power to prohibit it, because our Jose bar Jehuda once permitted it, as mentioned previously. It was written in the diary of our Jehoshua ben Levi, one who is born on the first day of the week will be a man, and not one thing will be in him. What does that mean? That there will not be any one good thing in him. Did not our Assi say that he was born on the first day of the week? Shall we say, that not one bad thing will be in him? Our Assi said, I and Dimi bar Kakusta were both born on the first day of the week, and, behold, I am a prince and he is a leader of robbers. What, then, is meant by, not one thing will be in him? This means, that he will be either wholly bad or wholly good. A man who was born on the second day of the week will be a man of violent passion. Why so? Because on the second day the water was separated. A man born on the third day will be rich and lascivious. Why so? Because grass was created on the third day. A man born on the fourth day will be wise and have a good memory. Why so? Because on the fourth clay the lights were created. A man born on the fifth day will be a charitable man. Why so? Because on that day the fishes and fowls were created. A man born on the sixth clay will be a very devout man. Arthanaman bar Itzhak said, he will be zealous in the fulfillment of commandments. A man born on the Sabbath will also die on the Sabbath, because on his account the great day of Sabbath was violated. Said Rabba bar Shila, he will, however, be called a great and pious man. Said Hanina to the men who related what was written in the diary above, go and tell the son of Levi, that the fortune of a man does not depend upon the day, but upon the hour he was born in. One who is born in the hour of sunrise will be a bright man, he will eat and drink of his own, but he will not be able to keep secrets and will not be successful in stealing. One who is born under Venus will be a rich man, but will be lascivious, because fire is generated under Venus. One who is born under Mercury will be bright and wise, because that star is the scribe of the sun. One who is born under the moon will be sickly or troubled. He will build and demolish, will not eat and drink his own, but will keep secrets, and will be successful in stealing. One who is born under Saturn will have all his thoughts and aims come to naught, and others say, to the contrary, all aims against him will come to naught. One who is born under Jupiter will be a righteous man, and Naaman bar Itzhak said he will be very devout. One who is born under Mars will be a man who will shed blood. He will either be a surgeon or a robber, a butcher or a circumciser, said Ashi. Rabbah said that he was born under Mars. Said Abai to him, thou, master, reprovest men, and whom thou reprovest, he dieth, hence thou, also, sheddest blood. It was taught, Hanina said, one who is born under a lucky star may be either rich or wise, and the same thing applies to Israelites also. Johanan said, an Israelite does not come under this fate, and Johanan says this in accordance with his dictum elsewhere, viz. Whence do we know that the Israelites are not subject to fate? Because it is written, Jeremiah x:2, thus hath said the Lord, do not habituate yourselves in the way of the nations, and at the of the heavens be ye not dismayed, although the nations should be dismayed at them. So the nations may be dismayed at the signs of the heavens, but not the Israelites, and Rab holds likewise, that the Israelites are not subject to fate. Jehudah said in the name of Rab, whence do we know that the Israelites are not subject to fate? Because it is written, Genesis 15:5, and he brought him forth abroad. Abraham said before the Holy One, blessed be he, Creator of the universe, lo, one born in my house will be my heir, and the Lord answered, he that shall come forth out of thy own bowels shall be thy heir, Gen 15:4, and Abraham said again, Creator of the universe. I have consulted my horoscope, and have found that I am not capable of having a son, so the Lord said to him, away with thy horoscope. An Israelite hath no fate. Of Samuel it is also known, that he thought the Israelites had no destiny, for Samuel and Ablat were once sitting together, and some men went past a meadow. Ablat, who was an astrologer, said to Samuel, pointing to one of the men, that man will not return. A snake will bite him, and he will die. Said Samuel, if he is an Israelite, he will come back. While they were talking, the man came back, so Ablat arose and examined him, and he found a snake cut in on the man's clothes. Said Samuel to the man, what didst thou do today, that thou hast escaped death? The man answered, it is our custom, when going out with a party of men, that we all contribute our share of victuals, and then have our meal in common. I knew that one of our party had no bread, victuals, and not wishing to make him ashamed, I secured the basket to gather the food, and when coining up to him I pretended to put in his share, but in reality put in mine, and thus he was not ashamed. Then thou hast committed an act of charity, said Samuel, and when he went out he preached that charity may be the cause of saving a man's life, and not only from a violent death, but also from death which otherwise would have overtaken a man naturally. Of ʻtæl it is also known, that he did not believe the Israelites to be subject to fate, for ʻtæl had a daughter, and the soothsayers predicted that on the day on which she should enter the garden a snake would bite her and she would die. He was very much troubled on that account. One day his daughter took off her headdress in the garden, and the needle protruding from it stuck on the side of the fence where a snake happened to be, and piercing the eye of the snake, the latter was killed. When ʻtæl's daughter went back to the house the snake dragged after her. Asked ʻtæl, "What didst thou do today, to escape death?" And she answered, "At dawn a man came to the door begging bread. Everybody, however, was at the table, and no one heard him but myself. I took my own meal, that thou gavest me, and gave it to him." Said ʻtæl, "Thou didst an act of charity, and this saved thee from death." He then went forth and preached, that charity may be the cause of saving a man's life, and not only from a violent death, but also from one that was to have come naturally. Naaman bar Yitzhak is also known to discountenance the theory of the Israelites being subject to fate, for the mother of Naaman was told by astrologers that her son would turn out to be a thief, so she would not let him go out bareheaded, saying, "Always keep thy head covered, that thou mayest fear the Lord, and pray to him for mercy," and he did not know why she always told him this. One day he sat underneath a tree studying, when his headwear fell off, and looking up, he saw the tree filled with delicious dates. He was very much tempted to take some of the fruit, although the tree did not belong to him, and accordingly climbed the tree, and bit off a branch with his teeth. Mishnah: pumpkins may be cut up for cattle, and carrion for dogs. Jehudah saith, if the carrion was not yet carrion, if the beast had not yet died, before the Sabbath, it must not be cut up, because, in that case, it is not part of what had been provided, for consumption on Sabbath. Gemara: it was taught, Bula said, the halakha prevails according to Jehudah, and of Rab it is also known that he agrees with Jehudah, as may be seen from his decree concerning covers of a vessel, on page 29. Levi also admits that the halakha prevails according to Jehudah, for when a carcass was brought to him for decision as to its fitness for use, or unfitness, on a festival, he would not inspect it unless it had lain in the dirt, because, should he hold it to be fit, it would forthwith become carrion and not even be fit for dogs, by reason of its turning into carrion on the festival, and thus not having been provided on the day before for consumption on the festival. Samuel, however, said, that the halakha prevails according to Simeon, as also does Zerah, because a Mishnah elsewhere, which teaches, that if an animal died, on Sabbath or on a festival, it must not be removed, was explained by Zerah to refer only to such an animal as was designated for a sacrifice and which must not be made use of at all, but any ordinary carcass may be removed. Johanan also said, that the halakha according to Simeon prevails. Is it possible that Johanan said this? Have we not learned that Johanan always holds halakhas to be in accordance with the abstract decrees of the Mishnah, and in another Mishnah we have learned that the wood of a beam that had been broken on a festival must not be used on the festival? Johanan claims, that the Mishnah above was taught in the name of Jose bar Jehudah. Come and hear, another objection: it is permitted to commence taking from a heap of straw on a festival for use as fuel, but not from wood designated for another purpose. This is also taught abstractly, and is certainly contrary to the opinion of Simeon. This above teaching refers to cedar beams intended for building purposes, and being very expensive should not be used as fuel, even according to Simeon. Come and hear, another objection based upon another abstract Mishnah: it is not permitted to water or to slaughter animals living in their wild natural state, but it is allowed as regards domestic animals. This is also contrary to Simeon. Johanan, however, found an abstract Mishnah that was in accord with Simeon, viz., that Mishnah concerning bones and husks which may be removed from the table, page 326, and Johanan holds as Naaman did later, that all decisions rendered by the school of Shammai are in accordance with the opinion of Jehudah, while those rendered by the school of Hillel agree with those of Simeon. It is related of Aha and Rabina, that one said that all laws pertaining to Sabbath remain as decreed by R. Simeon, with the exception of one thing, that had been set aside on account of causing disgust, namely, an old candlestick that had become soiled with the dripping tallow, and the other said, that even in this instance the halakha prevails according to R. Simeon, but the one thing that does not remain as decreed by R. Simeon is the case of a candlestick which had been used on the same Sabbath. Both admit, however, that as for the theory of designation where expensive articles are concerned, R. Simeon accepts it in that case, and declares, that they may not be used on Sabbath, as we have learned in a Mishnah, page 268, concerning the large wood saw and the plowshare, which, according to R. Simeon, also must not be handled, because they are expensive, and being used only by mechanics should not be handled by others. Mishnah, a man may annul vows, of his wife or daughter, 191 on the Sabbath, and consult, a sage, as to vows, relating to objects, required for the Sabbath. Window light may be shut out by blinds, a piece of stuff may be measured, and also a mikveh, plunge bath, to ascertain whether it be of legal size. It happened in the days of our Zadok's father, and in the days of Abba Saul ben Botnith, that they closed a window with an earthen jar, and then tied another vessel to a pole with papyrus, in order to ascertain whether, in a covered vessel, there was an opening 1 span high or not. From them we learn, that, in certain cases, it may be permitted to close, to measure, and to tie on the Sabbath. Gemara, the schoolmen propounded a question, does the term, required for the Sabbath, in connection with vows, apply to both clauses of that sentence, and if it does not, neither may be done on the Sabbath, whence we shall learn, that the time in which a man may annul the vow of his wife or daughter does not expire with the day, but continues for 24 hours, because, if the vows do not relate to the Sabbath and neither of the above two clauses may be executed, the man can annul the vow. At night after the Sabbath, or shall we say that the term, required for the Sabbath, applies only to the latter clause, that of consulting as to vows, and not to the first clause, that of annulling the vow, which would establish the fact that the time for annulment expires with the day and does not continue for 24 hours. Come and hear, R. Zodi, one of the disciples of R. Papi, taught, that only such vows as relate to the Sabbath may be annulled on the Sabbath, thence we may learn, that the time for annulment of vows does not expire for 24 hours. Said R. Ashi, did we not learn, in a Mishnah of Tract Nedarim, that the time for annulment of vows continues for 1 day only? Concerning this, there is a difference of opinion among the Tanaim, as will be explained in Tract Nedarim. And consult as to vows, etc. The schoolmen propounded a question, does this mean to say, that the man had not time before Sabbath, i.e., that he made the vow on the Sabbath, or even if he had time before Sabbath, but wishes to be released from his vow at once? Come and hear, the rabbis complied with the wish of R. Zutra the son of R. Zerah, and released him from his vow on a Sabbath, although he had plenty of time to have this done before Sabbath. 192 R. Jose wished to state, that, as to vows, a man may consult on Sabbath only a man who is a competent authority, chacham, but he must not consult 3 ordinary men, because that would appear as a judgment on business affairs. Abayi said to him, whereas 3 men may be consulted standing, or even if they are of kin, or even at night, it will not appear as an ordinary judgment. When a man wishes to annul the vow of his wife on the Sabbath, he must not say to her, as on a weekday, thy vow is annulled, or, I release thee from thy vow, but merely, go and eat, or, go and drink, and this releases her from her vow. Said R. Johanan, the man must, however, think at the time that he is annulling her vow. We have learned in a Beretha, the school of Shammai said, on Sabbath a man must annul the vow in his mind only, but on a weekday he must proclaim it by word of mouth. The school of Hillel said, however, that be it Sabbath or a weekday, it is sufficient if the man annul the vow in his mind without proclaiming it. They closed a window with an earthen jar, etc. Said R. Jehuda in the name of Rab, there was a small bridge between 2 houses, and underneath the bridge lay a part of a corpse, and a cracked tub stood on top of the 2 houses, but it was not known whether the crack in the tub was large enough to admit of the penetration of the uncleanness arising from the corpse. So, first of all holes which were in the walls of the 2 houses were stopped up with towels, then another vessel, a small jar, was tied with papyrus to a pole and laid on the tub, in order to see whether the crack was 1 span deep or not. 193. From them we learn that, in certain cases, one may close, measure, etc. Ulla once came into the house of the exilarch on Sabbath, and saw Rabba Bar Huna sitting in a tub of water and measuring it. Said Ulla to him, the rabbis only permitted the measuring of a plunge bath for ritual purposes, but did they permit it to be done for no purpose? Rabba Bar Huna answered, I am doing this merely to while away the time, I have nothing else to do, and must not think of the law while bathing, so it makes no difference. End of Tract Sabbath. The prayer at the conclusion of a tract, Abai said, May it be reckoned to me, for my reward in the world to come, that whenever I noticed a young scholar, of my college, had finished a tract of the Talmud, I gave a feast to all the sages of the day. Pages 250 and 251 of this tract. Bearing the above motto in mind and as a matter of peculiar interest, we shall translate below the laudatory prayer published in every edition of the ancient Talmud at the conclusion of each tract, and in justification of this our digression from the actual text would state the following, with all pious Israelites who were exclusively engaged in the study of the Talmud, and even with those who made it an incidental feature of their lives, it has since time immemorial been the custom to celebrate as a happy event the completion of the study of each tract. So marked was the degree of gratification at this frequent occurrence, that it became customary for the firstborn sons in Israel, who in commemoration of one of the plagues sent by the Lord upon the Egyptians were in the habit of fasting on the eve of Passover, to complete the study of a tract of the Talmud on that day, and, thanks to the feast given in honor of the occasion, escape the rather onerous duty of fasting, and even in the 9 days of penance occurring before the fast of the 9th of Abh, when the temple was destroyed, when meat was not to be eaten and wine was not to be drunk, the same subterfuge would be resorted to, in order that a feast might be given and thus break the fast of the 9 days. Apart from this, the prayer is rich in sentiment, and deserves to be rendered at the end of this volume once for all. We shall return to thee, Tract Sabbath, 194, and mayest thou return to us. We shall bear thee in mind, Tract Sabbath, and mayest thou bear us in mind. May we not be forgotten by thee, Tract Sabbath. And thou shalt not be forgotten by us on this earth nor in the world to come. This is to be repeated 3 times, when the following is to be recited. May it be thy will, O Lord, our God and God of our fathers, that thy law may be our pursuit in this world and in the world to come. May there be together with us, in the world to come, Hanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Naman bar Papa, Ahayi bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Raphram bar Papa, Raksh bar Papa, Surhab bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, and Doro bar Papa. 195 Make sweet, O Lord, our God, the words of thy law in our mouths, and in the mouth of thy people the house of Israel, and may we, our children, and the children of thy people the house of Israel, all know thy name and learn thy law. Wiser than my enemy doth thy commandment make me, for it is perpetually with me. Let my heart be entire in the statutes, that I may not be put to shame. Never will I forget thy precepts, for with them thou hast kept me alive. Blessed art thou, O Lord. Teach me thy statutes. Amen, amen, amen. Selah, Vede, forever. We thank thee, O Lord, our God and God of our fathers, that thou hast cast our lot amongst those that dwell in the houses of learning, and not amongst the occupants of the markets. For we arise early, and they arise early. We arise to the words of law, and they arise to words of vanity. We strive, and they strive. We strive and receive our reward, while they strive in vain. We run, and they run. We run towards everlasting life, and they run towards death, as it is written, but thou, O God, thou wilt bring them down into the pit of destruction. Let not the men of blood and deceit live out half their days, but I will indeed trust in thee. May it be thy will, O Lord my God, that as thou hast assisted me in the conclusion of Tract Sabbath, so mayest thou assist me in the commencement of other tracts and books of law, and in their conclusion, that I may live to learn and teach, to observe and to do and to keep all the words of the teachings of thy law with affection. And may the merits of all the Tanaim and Amoraim and other scholars uphold me and my children, in order that the law may not escape from my mouth, from the mouths of my children and children's children forever, and may it be verified in me, all that is written. When thou walkest, it shall lead thee, when thou liest down, it shall watch over thee, and when thou art awake, it shall converse with thee. For through me shall thy days be multiplied, and the years of thy life shall be increased unto thee. Length of days are in her right hand, in her left are riches and honor. The Lord shall give strength unto his people, the Lord will bless his people with peace. Revised July 22, 1896, and found all correct. Isaac M. Wise. Appendix page 24 of Volume 1, of this tract contains a Mishnah commencing with the statement, and these are some of the regulations enacted in the attic of Hananiah ben Hiskiah ben Gerin, and concluding, they enforced 18 regulations on that day. At the same time, the Mishnah fails to enumerate in the place mentioned, or elsewhere, these 18 regulations. The Gemara, however, conjectures upon their character and cites them in a scattered and incoherent manner. As a matter of course, this is not done without the adduction of numerous and varied opinions, but the conclusion is, that the 18 regulations are those which we shall enumerate farther on. In another section of the Gemara it is related, that 300 jars of wine and a like number of jars of oil were taken up into that attic in order to afford the sages no opportunity to leave their places until their deliberations concerning the regulations were finally concluded. Among these regulations there are, however, only 2 or 3 concerning Sabbath, the rest being dispersed throughout the Talmud in their proper departments and merely mentioned as regulations enacted during that session, but they are not enumerated in regular order either of sequence or time of enactment. Hence we, in consistency with our method of translation viz. to place everything in its proper department, have omitted in this tract the enumeration of these regulations, together with the diverse opinions concerning the reasons for their institution, which reasons as cited by the Gemara are very abstruse and for the most part untenable. In the last chapter of this tract, however, mention is again made of the 18 regulations, and it is declared, that their measure was made heaping full, while elsewhere in the Gemara the assertion is made, that the day on which they were enacted was as grave in its consequences for Israel as the day on which the golden calf was made. It is these 2 statements that have impelled us at the last moment to embody these 18 regulations in an appendix at the end of this volume, and state as best we can, after careful study and consideration of the subject, the most potent reasons for their enactment. With this purpose in view, we shall divide the 18 regulations into 5 classes, as follows: those pertaining to Theruma, heave offerings, Tuma, uncleanness, Chithan, mingling with other nations, Mikvah, legal bath, and Sabbath. Theruma is rendered useless when brought into contact with any one of the following 10 subjects. First, with a man who eats a thing that had been contaminated by a parent of uncleanness 196 and had thus become unclean in the first degree. Second, with a man who had eaten a thing unclean in the second degree, i.e., had been touched by a thing unclean in the first degree. Third, with a man who had drunk unclean beverages. Fourth, with a man who had bathed his head and the larger portion of his body in water that had been pumped up, drawn or scooped, and not in a legal bath. Fifth, with a clean person, i.e., one who had already taken a legal bath, but was subsequently drenched with 3 lugs of drawn water. Sixth, with the sacred scrolls of the Holy Writ either in part or in its entire form. 197 Seventh, with hands of which one was not quite certain that they had been kept clean the whole day. Eighth, with one who had taken a legal bath, if the Theruma was touched before sunset. Ninth, with eatables and utensils which had become unclean through beverages, as will be explained in Tract Yodame. When brought in contact with any one of these 9 subjects, Theruma is rendered useless. 10th, the crop raised from Theruma, seed, is of the same character as the seed. If the latter was clean when planted, the crop is clean, but if the seed was unclean, the crop is the same. Nevertheless, it is still considered Theruma, and subject to the laws of Theruma. Thus we have 10 regulations concerning Theruma. Concerning uncleanness, there were 4 regulations enacted. First, all movable things bring uncleanness on a man by means of a tent, not larger even than a span, covering a corpse, even if the space between the corpse and the tent was but an all's width. For explanation, see Tract ʻtæl. Second, the daughters of the Samaritans are considered unclean, as women suffering from their menstruation, from the day of their birth. Third, a child of a heathen is considered unclean, because it is considered as one afflicted with venereal disease. Fourth, one who presses grapes or olives renders the vessels used to receive the must or the oil susceptible to uncleanness. This is explained in detail in Tract Kalim. Concerning Chithan, but one regulation was enacted, covering 4 subjects: it was prohibited to partake of the bread, oil, or wine of other nations in order to prevent intermarriage with their daughters. Concerning mikveh, one regulation only was enacted, viz. If the water running out of a rain gutter flowed directly into a mikveh, the mikveh is not invalidated, but if the water was intercepted by a vessel from which it flowed into the mikveh, the latter becomes invalid, or even if 3 lugs of drawn water were poured into the mikveh, they render it useless, see Tract Mikvah. Concerning Sabbath, 2 regulations were enacted. First, one shall not search for vermin or read before lamplight, on Friday night. 198 Second, one who was overtaken by dusk on the Sabbath eve while on the road must give his purse to a Gentile. The learned reader who is not familiar with the intricate teachings of the Talmud, and even the student of the Talmud who has delved in its labyrinths of lore for the sake of probing into the ordinances and discussions contained in its volumes, will be quite amazed at the seeming unimportance and triviality of the above regulations, unless thoroughly comprehensive of the spirit of the Talmud and the object of the sages in their day. At the time when these regulations were enacted and enforced, there appeared no reasonable grounds for their enactment, and even the reasons advanced by the Gemara itself in a faltering, groping manner are in many instances quite absurd. Entirely contrary to their usual custom, the sages themselves did not base these regulations upon any inference, analogy, passage, or ordinance contained in the Holy Writ, a very remarkable occurrence indeed. Furthermore, at a casual glance, the student will not find in any one of the regulations a motive based even on common sense. Strange to say, it has also occurred that our excellent Hebrew poet L. Gordon, in a poem pungent with deepest sarcasm and pointed ridicule, commented upon these 18 regulations, saying, amongst other things, not for political purposes, not for the improvement of the government moral or material, did our sages seclude themselves in their attic, but merely to prohibit matters as trivial and absurd as that of reading by lamplight on the eve of Sabbath, etc. Had the poet, however, devoted deeper study and closer research to the environments, influences, and conditions prevailing in the days of these sages, he would readily have discovered that the greatest political import, the gravest questions of government both moral and material, actuated the institution of these apparently ridiculous regulations, all culminating and leaning towards the accomplishment of one great object, viz. that of keeping the small nation of Jews intact and guarding it from the dangers menacing it not only from the exterior world but from its interior vampires and oppressors. It should not be overlooked that when the deliberations anent these regulations were about to be commenced, the hall used for the session was closely guarded by men armed with keen-edged swords, under instructions to permit all who desire to enter to do so, but to instantly thrust their swords through any one endeavoring to retreat. And what was the discussion commenced with? Merely an argument determining the uncleanness of certain vessels, which the priests could not approach, as will be seen farther on. Still, Hillel the prince, the mighty sage, sat before his old-time opponent Shammai, and listened to him with the most profound attention and reverence, just as if he were the least among his disciples. This historical fact was but another item in inducing us to digress from our established method and insert the 18 regulations, together with the explanation of their importance, for had we not done so, it is highly probable that we would have called down the criticism of many scholars who could not overlook such an omission. At no period in the history of the Jewish race do we find so much deliberation, profundity of thought, and depth of calculation in evidence as at the time when the sages secluded themselves in the attic of Hananiah ben Hiskiah. There it was, that means were devised to keep the nation of the Jews whose friends were always in the minority, and whose enemies, not only abroad but in their very midst, were as the sands of the sea intact and proof against annihilation. All of the literature current among the masses was carefully scanned and revised. The ethical code was reinforced, and wherever necessary purged of objectionable matter. This censorship was carried to such an extent that it was attempted to reject even Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Ezekiel as undesirable, and it was only with great difficulty that those in authority were prevailed upon to let them remain. The records of ancestry, however, tracing the descent of every existing family, which were the pride of the people, as well as all works treating of medical science and the art of healing, were buried and hidden beyond recovery. Even the Apocrypha were eliminated from the Holy Writ and declared ordinary literature, and many other writings unknown to us even in this day, as well as all secret scripts, were thoroughly revised and made adaptable to the existing times and circumstances. All this, and more, was done with the sole purpose of preserving the integrity of the Jewish race and preventing its absorption by other nations. Thus it was commenced to accustom the Jew to study and thought, and as an outcome of this period of virtual renaissance the 18 regulations were enacted with two prime objects in view, as follows: firstly, to diminish as far as possible the constantly growing domination of the priests, for the high priestdom, with which the supreme governing power was identical, could be purchased with money, and more especially because the number of priests in the last century prior to the destruction of the temple had grown to such a vast proportion that those in actual service alone numbered little short of 20,000. Apart from these were those who did not perform actual service, while enjoying all the immunities and privileges of their rank as priests, and they were priests who had the least blemish on their bodies, those whose descent or even whose wives' descent left the least room for doubt, and the wealthy and influential priests who would not perform the menial duties of priests, but left them to the less fortunate and more insignificant of their number. See Die Priester und der Kultus, by Dr. Adolf Buckler, Vienna, 1895. Of such men was the party in power composed, and they made but too free a rise of their authority. As a matter of course, restrictions had to be provided wherewith to relieve the oppressed. Secondly, the object was to prevent the amalgamation of the Jews with the other nations with whom they were in daily and constant association. Now for the manner in which the first object was about to be accomplished. Quite some time previous to the time of which we are treating, the layman had, after a hard struggle, succeeded in divesting the priests of their spiritual power, i.e., the right to decide all questions pertaining to religious and ritual matters, whether a thing was allowed or forbidden, clean or unclean, etc. By proving that the priests were far too ignorant to be competent judges. 199 This struggle had been going on since the days of Nehemiah, for prior to his day the priests were the sole judges both in spiritual and in temporal affairs, claiming their privilege in accordance with the passage, Deuteronomy 21. 5, and after the priests' decision shall be done at every controversy and every injury. Having wrested the spiritual power from the priests, the supervision of all religious and ritual matters was conferred upon the Pharisees, who henceforth were the recognized authorities in the interpretation of the law. This accomplished, the next step decided upon was to limit as much as possible the temporal power of the priests. It was decided not to do this in too precipitate a manner, but cautiously and unostentatiously, using as a medium regulations seemingly unimportant, but the hidden motives of which were far-reaching in their consequences. The time of Hananiah ben Hizkiah was the more opportune for such a coup d'état, as by that time the Pharisees had obtained the upper hand of all other existing sects, notably the Sadducees. Now, inasmuch as it proved to be an easy matter to enact laws by means of which the Jews would be prevented from amalgamating with other nations, such as the prohibition of partaking the bread, oil, etc. of Gentiles, the proclamation declaring the children of heathens unclean, to prevent the children of Jews from joining them at play and thus forming attachments, and the women of the Samaritans, the deadliest enemies of the Jews, unclean, in order to prevent their employment as servants by Jews. It was but little more difficult to devise laws which would forever break the oppressive domination of the priests in a mild but nevertheless effective manner. The first step necessary for the accomplishment of this desirable end was to completely destroy the system of espionage practiced by the priests, and which was carried on to such an extent that spies were constantly prying into actions and even utterances in the houses of the laymen. This was, however, by no means an easy task, from the very fact that the priests were virtual shareholders in all the possessions of the laymen. 1/50 of all grain raised by the peasants was their share as theroma, 1/10 of such grain comprised the tithe, and 1/10 of the tithe belonged to the priests individually, the first of the dough, the first of shorn wool, the parts of slaughtered cattle, the firstlings of cattle, the firstfruits of trees and produce, all belonged to the priests, and it was but natural that they were to be found in the houses of the laymen at all times, whither they would come not to humbly ask for their donations, but to demand it as the rightful possessors and shareholders. Nor were they at all backward about taking a hand in the management of all other affairs of the layman, under the plea of guarding their own interests, and thus at times willingly, sometimes unwillingly, they were the spies of the higher authorities of the government. The question then arose how to find a place where the deliberations for the suppression of this constantly growing evil could be held without the presence of the spying priests, and to meet the exigencies of the case, an old decree that had been promulgated in the early days of the existence of the temple was again called into being and made effective. The decree was the one enacted in the time of Jose ben Joser Ishazrita and Jose ben Johanan the Jerusalemite, and read, "All the lands outside of Judea are unclean, i.e., all eatables and beverages containing any degree of sanctity whatever are rendered unclean by coming in contact with the soil of those lands outside of Judea, but aside from such eatables and beverages nothing was rendered unclean." Now, the only eatables and beverages containing any sanctity whatever, which could be found outside of Jerusalem, where the sacrifices and other sanctified articles were brought, were the gifts and the theruma set aside for the priests. Thus we see that the declaration of uncleanness, ostensibly directed against all eatables containing any degree of sanctity, was in reality directed against the theruma of the priests, while the priests themselves were flattered by the elevation of the theruma to the degree of highest sanctity, and its object will be apparent from the following argument. The theruma is invested with sanctity only when it is separated from the bulk, but while still a part of the entire crop it is regarded as ordinary grain. If the theruma were separated from the bulk in any land outside of Judea, the moment it comes in contact with the soil it becomes unclean and unfit for use. This fact made it necessary to separate the theruma in Judea. The transportation of the entire crop to Judea for such a purpose involving too much labor and expense, part of the crop was set aside in the field, and from that part a sufficient quantity was separated and sent to the Holy Land. There the quantity of the theruma, which according to biblical ordinance could have been only 1 grain, but according to established custom amounted to 1/50th of the entire crop, was separated from the quantity sent. The consequence of this mode of procedure was, that the presence of the priest at the place where the crop was harvested was no longer required, as he could not demand his share outside of Judea. Thus it was rendered possible to hold a convocation where the presence of the priest was no longer to be dreaded. 200 It seems that up to the time of Hananiah ben Hizkiah this decree had been evidently disregarded or not sufficiently effective. 201 For we see that 80 years prior to the destruction of the temple it was again promulgated, and this time reinforced with the declaration that even the atmosphere of all lands outside of Judea was unclean and all articles containing any degree of sanctity were rendered unclean by contact with such atmosphere. The 80 years before the destruction of the temple correspond with the time of Hananiah ben Hizkiah, and it is quite possible that the sages called by the Talmud, the sages of the 80 years, were the same that took part in the deliberations in the attic, and that, in order to secure at least one place where they could hold a convocation undisturbed by the priests, they declared even the atmosphere of the lands outside of Judea unclean. The Talmud relates, also, that in the city of Usha the decree was reinforced for the 3rd time with the declaration that all articles rendered unclean by the atmosphere of such lands were not only to be rendered useless, but were to be immediately burned, as a precaution lest a priest might accidentally make use of them. Still, the decree was not as effective as it should have been, as long as the priest could come and announce that he would use his share of the theruma for seed or dispose of it as seed, and to meet this exigency the sages of the attic first of all decreed that the crops raised from clean or unclean theruma, used as seed, were clean or unclean respectively. Again, means had to be devised to rid the layman residing in Judea proper from the obnoxious presence of the priests at all times, for at harvest time, or when the grain was brought from the lands outside of Judea, the ever-watchful priest was on band. To this end the subsequent regulations concerning theruma were enacted and gradually reinforced. Thus at first a man who had eaten a thing unclean in the 1st degree rendered theruma useless, then a man who had eaten a thing of the 2nd degree of uncleanness, until finally even a sacred scroll, or even a hand that had come in contact with a sacred scroll, and last of all a hand that was not known to be positively clean, rendered theruma useless. All this was done with the sole object of keeping the priests out of the houses of the laymen, and rather bring the theruma to them than have them come to demand it. Should they come in spite of this, it was not difficult to find a pretext for calling the theruma unclean. In order, however, not to make the purpose of these regulations too apparent, and thus give offense to the priests, other regulations were enacted in conjunction with these, which, while of no value whatever in themselves, acted as screens for the actual intentions. It is now not difficult to explain the historical sensation caused by the deference shown by Hillel to Shammai at the commencement of these deliberations, and the reasons which prompted the posting of an armed guard at the entrance of the hall. Hillel, in his capacity as a prince of Israel, was somewhat too timid to proceed against the priests in too harsh a manner, but the masses were so much incensed against their oppressors, and so deeply conscious of their grievances, that he could not stem the popular tide against them. In this emergency it was Shammai, under ordinary circumstances of lesser consequence than Hillel, that proved to be the champion of the popular cause, and in order to ensure for him a telling majority when the question came up for a final vote, the doors of the hall were guarded so that none could leave, while all were allowed to enter. Seeing the patriotism and popularity of Shammai, the prince could not help bowing to popular sentiment and showing respect to the favorite of the hour. It would require a volume of many pages to demonstrate how each one of the regulations instituted was directed against the priests, how deeply it injured them, and in what measure it curtailed their previous unlimited sphere of action, also, especially, how the dispute between Hillel and Shammai concerning the susceptibility to uncleanness of vessels used at grape and olive pressing concerned the priests. Even then, a person not thoroughly imbued with the spirit of those times could scarcely understand it, but we would request that the 18 regulations be again carefully perused, and it will readily be observed by even the casual reader, from the hints given, that the 10 ordinances 202 relating to ʻtæl were directed entirely against the priests, and the 4 concerning uncleanness were in part against the priests and in part against mingling with other nations. As for the regulation against mingling, that goes without saying, while the regulations concerning the mikveh and Sabbath were but incidental and trivial matters intended as a screen for the grave importance of those mentioned. I'm Julie, the woman who runs Global Gray, the website where this ebook was published. These are my own formatted editions, and I hope you enjoyed reading this particular one. If you have this book because you bought it as part of a collection, thank you so much for your support. If you downloaded it for free, please consider, if you haven't already, making a small donation to help keep the site running. If you bought this from Amazon or anywhere else, you have been ripped off by someone taking free ebooks from my site and selling them as their own. You should definitely get a refund, uneasy face. Thanks for reading this, and I hope you visit the site again. New books are added regularly, so you'll always find something of interest, smiley face.